Our today is about how senior attorneys without business can get positions in law firms. But really, I think if you're on this webinar and you're not a senior attorney, it actually applies to you. It applies to you as well. And it applies to pretty much anybody who's trying to get a position in a law firm. Now, this is a live webinar. So what I'll do is after I give the webinar, I'll take questions. And also, if you were on the webinar last week and I didn't get to your questions, then I'll also get to your questions this week or today as well. So I did save all the questions from last week, and so we'll get to those. Okay, one of the biggest myths out there is it's very difficult with senior attorneys with no business to find positions in law firms. The general consensus with most recruiters who don't know a ton about the business and how things work is that people are typically placeable if they went to the best law schools and worked in the best firms between 1 and 5 years. And once you get maybe 6 or 7 years, you start becoming senior. And if you don't have business, you can't get a position. And that's how I learned the business when I was very young, when I talked to other recruiters. But at the same time, that's absolutely not true. And as a matter of fact, of the hundreds of candidates that I have of mine that are interviewing right now, a lot of them actually are senior, and a lot of senior attorneys are, even if they don't have business, are actually very easy to place and I'll tell you why in a few minutes. But I've placed, when I say hundreds, it's probably actually at this point thousands of senior attorneys with no business. And I place them every month, and several of them a month, and probably even every week. And I have for over 2 decades. Now, I'm going to talk to you today about how I get them positions and what I do. And if you're a senior attorney, this is not a pitch to work with me. It's actually to show you what you can do and how you can get a great job. And I'm going to tell you what I know about it and how it's done. And if you are a senior attorney with no business, it can be very frustrating because what happens is you may apply to firms and they'll ask if you have any business. And if you don't, then you won't hear from them again. And then the same thing will happen with recruiters. If you call recruiters and they ask you if you have any business and you say you don't, then most of them that will not end up talking to you or want to work with you. And that's just ridiculous because it's actually very easy to place senior positions. And other times people will leave law firms to go in-house and be senior, that are senior and try to go back to law firms. That's very difficult to do if you're trying to get jobs in law firms in major markets or in large firms, but that also can be done. A lot of times attorneys will leave to go have kids or to go on sabbaticals, and during that time will get senior. And at the same time, those same attorneys can also get positions. And sometimes people retire and then they want to go back to work. And those people also can get positions. I've literally placed people in their 80s before. None of this is that difficult. What I want you to understand just as we get started is that if you're a senior attorney, you definitely can get a position. And the number of law firms in the United States is staggering. Our company works with over 30,000 of them, but there's and we're finding new ones by the hundreds every day because they're popping up in cities and things all over the country. There's an incredible number of opportunities. And personally, for me, it's very upsetting. It almost seems like a crime that a lot of attorneys will stop their careers prematurely because they aren't getting the reception they want from the firms that they're applying to, and they don't necessarily know how to get positions, and they get very discouraged when they try knocking on the same types of doors looking for positions. So it's disheartening when you get rejected. It's not fun. It's not fun being told that you're not marketable by recruiters or by firms, getting the cold shoulder because you're senior, but that's just certain types of firms. I'm going to tell you how to find the firms that are interested in you in a few minutes. But if a legal recruiter tells you you're not marketable, in most cases, what that recruiter's saying is they don't know what they're doing, or they're not specialized in it, or they don't want to do the work to get you a job. You need to find another recruiter. And the reason I'm not trashing recruiters here, but what I would like you to understand is recruiters just are salespeople, are most of them. And I don't mean that in a negative way. There's certain salespeople that are very knowledgeable about a product, and there's certain salespeople that aren't. And as salespeople, they typically want to sell what they believe are the easiest products. And so the easiest product for a recruiter to sell is someone with a lot of business or an associate that is young and has great qualifications. Those are the easiest products to sell. But there's a huge market out there for people that may not look as easy to sell. So if you're hearing from recruiters that don't want to work with you, in most cases, that means that they may not, if you have otherwise good qualifications, they may not know how to place you. And if your peers or other people tell you can't get a job unless you have business, they also don't know what they're talking about. And when I tell you that, I want you to understand that in terms of the revenue and placement fees that I've generated from placing senior attorneys, it's probably over $100 million. It's definitely in the tens of millions of dollars. I've placed a lot of them. I place them pretty much every week. And anybody that tells you that you can't get a job because you're senior, in most cases, doesn't know what they're talking about. And if you personally believe it's going to be impossible, then you've brainwashed yourself. It's not to say that it's easy or there's not certain things you need to do, but it's actually possible. And actually, if you do follow these rules I'm going to give you today, not very difficult. So I'm going to talk to you about 6 ways. There's actually a lot more than 6 ways. And if you have questions after this presentation, I can certainly give you more. But if you're an attorney, it's very possible that you can get a position if you know what you're doing. And these are the 6 guidelines to make it happen. I want one of the first things you need to understand when you're a senior attorney looking for a position is that you're a commodity. And it's the same thing if you're a younger attorney or whatever, you're a commodity. And there's someone that can make money from hiring you. And that's really what it is. It's, can we make money hiring this person? Do they offer us value? One of the biggest things I tell senior attorneys, and I also tell young attorneys that are having a hard time getting a job, or anybody that's having a hard time getting a job, is it's often very important to be geographically flexible. The more markets you look at, the more opportunity you're going to have. If you're in a specialized practice area, looking in smaller markets where there's not a lot of people like you can be very helpful. So that's just one of the things I want to just bring up. And this is not even part of the 6 points, but these are just some general kind of rules. And you also need to make your resume look like a specialist. So most senior attorneys, if you want to get a position with a law firm that, bigger than a few attorneys, you're going to need to look like a specialist. And essentially what that means is if your resume makes it look like you do a bunch of different things, people are going to get confused and they're not going to know how to use you. So you need to look like you're specialized in something in some practice area. A lot of times, one of the biggest mistakes that senior attorneys make is they make the resume look like they go over their entire career history, and they may mention like 10 or 12 practice areas and talk about their leadership roles and everything like that. And the senior attorneys that get jobs almost always look like specialists. I remember, I'll talk about some of the placements today, but almost everyone that I place as a senior attorney looks like some sort of specialist. They don't look like generalists, they look like specialists. And the resume typically is not bragging. It's just very direct about the specialty. And then the other thing you need to do too, if you're a senior attorney, these are just, again, a few tips before we get started, the 6 reasons, is you need to be very aggressive and you need to do things that other attorneys will not. And that means, essentially what that means is it means you need to apply to a lot of places. If you work with our company, which I'm sure there's a ton of people on this call that do, you'll know that I send a lot of opportunities of research places for you and jobs and things. And this is what you need to do. Everybody should be looking at a lot of places because you never know what's going to be the right fit. It's impossible for any recruiter to say that they understand the business needs of every firm in a city. In Los Angeles, there's probably 5,000 or 6,000 law firms that we work with. Out of those 5,000 or 6,000 firms, it's impossible to understand at any point in time what their business needs are. So you need to often look at a lot of different places, and you also need to put your ego aside, meaning if someone rejects you, it's nothing to do with you. It just means they don't have the money to pay you. That's a better way to look at it, or they don't have the work for you. That's not your problem, that's theirs. So you really need to put your ego aside and not worry about it. I've had instances where I've represented senior attorneys and they've gone through a list of 15 places I've given them and only chosen one. And honestly, you need to put your ego aside when you're looking for a position. One of the first things is if you're a senior attorney, you really do need to change your mindset. You need to realize that you're a commodity that has value, and then you just need to find a buyer. And this is what it's really about. People, when they get their ego involved, what they're thinking is if they're rejected, it's some statement about them, that there's something wrong with them. And really all this is about it's about finding people that are interested in the commodity you're selling. So if I'm going door to door, which I used to do when I was a child, selling Christmas cards and newspaper subscriptions and various things, you just have to find someone that wants what you're selling. And that's really all there is to it. And a lot of senior attorneys really do give up their search before they even start. They assume because they're interested, no one's going to be interested in them. And it's just completely ridiculous. If you've been practicing more than 5 years, you have skills that others don't have. You hopefully understand a practice area in enough detail that the law firm that you find can sell your services to clients. It's pretty simple, but you also have to find a law firm that has the work and needs people at your level that it can give the work to. And it means that they have to have extra work and they need to be able to purchase what you're selling. An example that you can buy almost anything you want on a site like eBay. People sell things that you'd never think would ever sell. Same thing with Craigslist and all these sites. They sell old chairs, they sell old rugs, they sell their clothing. And I buy all sorts of ridiculous things. Sometimes I buy things the sellers are astonished that someone's even purchasing it. Last week I bought for a treadmill, a 20-year-old treadmill, the circuit board that the person had listed for 6 months, but I bought it. I bought some used headphones that had amplifiers in them or something but the people will buy anything. And whether it's eBay or Craigslist or garage sale, these things all prove it. And it's the same thing with attorneys. And again, I'm saying this as someone who makes their living selling attorneys. But right now, there are law firms that are looking for people just like you if you're a senior attorney. And you need to market yourself properly, and you need to find those types of firms in the right market. And it's important for you to realize that when you put your ego aside, you start realizing that every law firm is a business. And all they're essentially doing, it's pretty simple, is they're paying you a lower rate than they're charging for you on the open market. So if they have firms that are people that are interested in someone like you, if they have clients that are willing to pay for someone like you, then they're willing to hire you. And there's law firms all over the United States that need people to do work. If you have the ability to do a certain type of work, there's going to be people that are interested in you. There's definitely people that are interested in you. Even if you feel like you're so old that you're slow, there will be law firms that are interested in you for training associate. There's always people that are interested in you. I know attorneys in their late 80s that don't have any business and that practice in obscure branches of a law that get jobs with hearing aids and all sorts of things. You have to ask yourself if you're senior, like what type of law firm is going to be interested in you. And you can't look at the market with blinders on. The problem that most people make is they think in terms of only the largest firms or only certain firms or only certain markets or only certain size firms. And you really have to understand the legal landscape and how it works. So one audience that if I was a senior attorney, and one of the ways I play senior attorneys is you find startup firms and newer up and coming firms. And the reason is that these are great places to apply to. Now, you need to research to find them. This is the kind of research we do at BCG. The reason they're good is because they need credibility with their clients. A lot of times the attorneys at startup firms have a lot of business already. That's why they're starting off and breaking off. And so they need people often to do senior level work. Another thing that I really want to point out, and this goes also for junior attorneys looking for firms, is when you find startups and new law firms, they typically don't know what they're doing from a business standpoint. So what I mean by that is they don't have rigid hiring systems. They don't do things like check your background very carefully. I know one startup firm that is very funny, that has hired people that said they were an attorney and they weren't even an attorney, and worked there for 5 years until they figured out that the person wasn't even an attorney. When startup firms are starting, they definitely are not settled in all the ways that large law firms are once they get systems and things and the business is established. And so it's much easier for attorneys often, especially senior attorneys, to get into newer firms because those newer firms often don't know what they're doing. They think, we can hire a senior attorney to work on something, or we need people that can do this, or we need people that can work with our associates because we're so busy with these clients. And these startups are often being run by first-time entrepreneurs who are disorganized, and they make a lot of mistakes. They often hire people that they should hire, but they often hire people that they shouldn't be hiring and that other firms wouldn't take a chance on because it's much harder for them to get people to go there. If you're a startup firm of 10 or 15 attorneys, you're not going to get the best law students going there. Most people are new attorneys. They're not going to be able to pay the salaries in most cases, and most people won't even know about them. So your job, if you're a senior attorney, is to find these new firms and to do research to find them. How do you find them? You can use Google. They're not going to be in directories because they're not going to want to pay to be in directories. You're going to need to do searches on Google for news stories. You're going to need to do all sorts of things to find these firms, but these are great places to get hired. As a matter of fact, they're great for new attorneys too. These startup firms are not going to be as rigid and have all these rules that the larger firms have because larger firms put these rules into place and then it becomes very difficult. I've known startup firms that have had people hired that weren't even attorneys and had them that said they were attorneys and had them on payroll before people even found out. It was very funny, but this is how disorganized they are. And you wouldn't believe some of the people that get hired by some of these small firms. I had an instance once where it was very funny, where I read an article it was during one of these economic booms. And I read an article from this, it was in the San Francisco Daily Journal. And they had an interview with this attorney. He said, in 45 years of practice, I'd never seen so much work and we don't know what to do. We're bursting at the seams. And I managed to place 3 people there that had been chronically unemployed for a long time. And the firm was so disorganized that they didn't even know how recruiters worked. And so after they hired the people, they called up and they said, what do we pay you? This is how disorganized some of these firms are. And they're often the Wild West when it comes to hiring attorneys. I mean, they like people that have experience. They like people that have worked in large law firms because it gives them, or other law firms, it gives them credibility. They love having people they can call partner, but not necessarily make them partners to look like they're big, important firms. And so these are great places to apply. You need to find them, but if you find them, they're often very easy to get jobs with. And most people don't look at these firms. Most recruiters don't know about them because you have to be on top and constantly researching the market. We have a research team at our company of over 60 people that is constantly researching and finding these. But the larger and the more the law firm clients that they have, the more work. And they can use your experience and your pedigree to impress their clients. And sometimes they're even interested in just having you on the website. There's all sorts of arrangements that they'll make. But they're very good. They also may have a lot of work for you to do. But startup firms are an incredible source of places to work, especially for senior attorneys and for newer attorneys. And because no one knows about them, they're often getting very few applications. They love getting applications from people that have read about them and are interested in them because it makes them feel a sense of legitimacy. They love getting resumes from people that have worked in big firms because it also makes them feel like they're doing well. And they're just all around great places to get jobs for senior attorneys. And also for new attorneys, they may be having a difficult time finding jobs. And typically these firms they break off of large firms. They may break off of smaller firms or mid-sized firms, but they're typically started by younger attorneys that want and need that credibility. And they often grow very rapidly. Sometimes they're started by older attorneys, but generally they're young attorneys in their first 10 years of practice or 20 years of practice that are starting these firms. And these firms break off. All you need to do is read the legal news. They're starting every day in cities all over the country. So they're great places. I know lots of attorneys in Los Angeles and around the country that are very young and have huge books of business, like in the tens of millions of dollars. And they can't possibly do all the work they have. And they break off from firms and then they start firms and they need people to do the work, to meet with clients. And these startup firms are in just about every city. And a lot of them have more business than they possibly can handle. And they need people that are senior. I've made lots of placements, for example, of real estate attorneys and people that have gone in-house in real estate. There's lots and lots of real estate firms. I'm just talking about here, there's a recent placement of a woman that was at a law firm for 5 or 6 years and then went in-house for 10 years and then left for 3 years, completely wasn't working to have a child. She was looking for 6 months for a position before she found me. And let me just tell you a little bit about how most people do their job searches, why It's so messed up, and why if you're a senior attorney, even if you're like a junior or a mid-level or whatever attorney and having a difficult time, most people, when they search for positions, what they do is they may contact a recruiter, but a lot of them will do things like you'll go and you'll look on Indeed or Law Crossing or whatever, LinkedIn, for jobs and try to find jobs there. When you're looking at jobs that are advertised, just keep in mind that you're competing with every single other person that's applying to those same types of jobs. And so everybody has access to Indeed and LinkedIn and so forth, and is applying to the same jobs. So typically it's going to be a little bit harder for you if you're applying to those same jobs. So what do? You research things like up and coming new law firms and apply to those when no one else is applying to them, and you get a job. These are really simple rules, but no one thinks this way. This particular woman, I was able to get her hired the minute they saw her resume. And again, this was a small law firm that had just started, and the partner that started had more business than he possibly could handle and needed someone senior like her who also knew how to interact with in-house counsel at the companies that were his clients. So this is another example of someone, and these examples happen every day, of someone that was looking for a position and didn't know what they were doing, but then wasn't having any luck. But then we found a startup firm for the person. And in real estate, these firms start every month in Los Angeles or around Los Angeles. This start every month in Orange County. There's tons of them. Years ago, another attorney contacted me, been out of work for 3 or 4 years. This particular person had been out of work because he was a SEC commissioner. And there was national news articles that came out when it was discovered that he was married to 2 women at the same time. And it was a scandal. And he lost his jobs, both of his wives, and was going through a very difficult time. This is decades ago, but at some point drugs were involved, and there was just a lot of problems. And all this information was online. So when you would type his name into a search engine, all this stuff would come up. And when I met him, this person was just completely a nervous wreck. He was chewing his lip, and so his lip he was bleeding or had scab. Anyway, it was very sad. He was very nervous, and he'd heard about me, that I was placing all these senior attorneys and sought me out. And back then, I think there was an article or something. There was a national law. I don't know. But anyway, I was placing a lot of senior attorneys right when I started out. And so I talked to him, and I had nothing to lose, and decided that I would start helping him. And it's the same thing. I was reading the San Francisco Daily Journal, and I saw this firm that I was telling you about earlier that said, never in my 30 years of practice have I seen so much work, and I don't know what to do. And again, if you see, all you need to do to find these types of firms, it's very easy. You need to read legal news, meaning you want to just peruse different stories. And I'm talking about like serious legal news, which is, I would say, things like American Lawyer's Good, just different things that list Law 360, things that list movements, and BCG, we list movements. We also do in JD Journal, but things that are listing movements and firms that are growing and getting those ideas, because those are the places you want to apply to. New firms starting, like articles about that. You could type in new firm Austin or new firm and get this information. But these stories are everywhere. They're very easy to find. And so you should be watching the news. You shouldn't be going on to, and again, I'm not trying to be rude here, but you shouldn't be just going on to websites and applying to the same jobs everyone else is. You should be finding firms that are basically saying, we have a lot of work, and make the conclusion that they're probably going to be interested in you. So this particular firm, when I read about it, seemed like a great opportunity for my scandal-plagued attorney to get a position. They hired him, and because of his expertise, which I believe was in a M&A or something like that, they couldn't have cared less, or securities actually. And he knew what he was doing. He was a good attorney. And within a year, this same law firm merged into a huge firm, like one of the 10 largest law firms in the world. And suddenly this guy who had a very tough time before was a partner in one of the largest law firms in the world, which would have been an impossibility given his background before. Again, I just want to be very clear with you. And I don't know how much I can make this point, is there's so many up and coming law firms in the United States. It's insane. Like, they're starting every day in every market, and pretty much not every small market, and you need to find these law firms if you're a senior attorney. You need to find these law firms even if you're not a senior attorney, because they're great places to work. They're also great places if you're a junior attorney to go into and have a good chance of making partner because there's opportunities there. So that's, again, I can't emphasize enough how important and it is for senior attorneys to try to find these upcoming firms. And again, just typing in new firm Charlotte or doing searches for firms on Google or other sources, you're going to be able to find these firms and firms you haven't heard of before. And I'm sure as AI and ChatGPT and that sort of stuff gets more advanced, it'll probably do real-time searches and you'll be able to say, what are some new firms that have been started in the past 30 days? Literally, things are going in that direction. Finding firms in this way, the startup and newer up-and-coming firms is extremely important. It's where I place a lot of senior attorneys. It's where your expertise will be needed and definitely a great source. Established law firms are also a great place to get positions. My very first placement as a legal recruiter was of a senior attorney with no business. He was in his early 60s and had been out of work for about 5 years when I finally saw his resume. This particular attorney had started a diaper company in Eastern Europe, or maybe it was in Russia. I don't know why. The company had failed. He was the first diaper company in this country selling plastic diapers. And then Procter & Gamble came in and muscled his way in and put him out of business. And so he came back to the United States. He's someone that you would think would not be able to get a job. Leaving the law to go start a diaper company is not a good thing when that law firms are likely to believe that you're going to have any form of stability, especially if they hire you. Especially if you fail at it. But anyway, so he came back to the United States to find another job. He called every recruiter in the country. Every attorney recruiter he could find. He spent his entire days applying to jobs back then and things like Monster and so forth. And getting blown off by recruiters, which if you're a senior attorney, I'm pretty confident this is what you experience. He applied to every law firm he knew and that did the type of work he did that he could find and with a job and wasn't able to get a position. He'd done networking. He'd gone and networked with all his old colleagues and other people he could find going to conferences, and that didn't help. And then he found me. And again, like sometimes it's good. One of the reasons a lot of times young people do well in business is because they don't have all these preconceptions and ways of thinking about things that other people have. And this particular attorney was a securities attorney. And again, if you have a marketable skill as a senior attorney, so a marketable skill would be securities or M&A or patent or different types of litigation, personal injury litigation is one, or family law or trust and estates, you will get lots and lots of jobs. I've had trust and estates attorneys, just an aside, that have gone a year without being able to get an interview and then get my attention and all of a sudden 15 interviews. It's just because you have to understand how to market people. But this particular attorney was a securities attorney and been a good one. And law firms need people with marketable skills. They always have and always will. So if you are good at something, you should, and you're senior, you're always going to be able to get a job. Obviously, a startup firm is going to be easier in most cases than an established law firm. But this law firm, this particular attorney allowed me to send him to law firms all over the United States. Now, back then, I wouldn't have sent him to probably 200 firms. I probably would have sent him, I don't remember what the number was, but it was probably less than 100 firms. And I researched and contacted firms and saw where there might be an interest. And I ended up getting him a job in one of the top 20 largest law firms in the world as a partner. And I believe that law firm was Preston Gates, which merged into K&L Gates. And the reason he went there is because the head securities attorney in that firm was leaving to go it was Preston Gates, which is Bill Gates' father, was leaving to go be the personal securities attorney for Bill Gates. And was it Gates? Well, anyway, I don't know. Was leaving to be the head securities attorney was leaving to go be Bill Gates' personal securities attorney. And they needed someone to service his clients. So they wanted someone without business. And the firm wanted a partner. They didn't want them to have business because they had enough work. And they wanted to replace a partner. So he moved, I believe this guy was in Chicago, never had been to Seattle. And then he moved to Seattle and became a partner at K&L Gates. There's another one. Not too long ago, I was working with an attorney, this is another credible story. She'd been working in a law firm in the Midwest and was a service partner servicing the work of another female partner, meaning that this female partner had a lot of work and she was doing work for her. She was an ERISA attorney. And the partner she was working for met a man online. And give me a second here. I'm sorry, there's something, but there's an ERISA attorney, and the partner she met this partner met a man online, and after a horrible date, the man shot and killed her. There were stories, I believe it was in Indianapolis or something. There were stories, I couldn't believe it. And anyway, the woman ended up losing her job because the clients, of course, didn't want to stick around in the firm because anyway. And so she started this fledgling solo practice, and she'd been operating for a few years when she found me. She didn't have substantial business. It was okay. And she wanted to work in, I don't know if it was Indianapolis or Chicago or whatever the Midwestern city she was in. She wanted to work there. And so she had confined her search to that city. And then I believe some cities are around there. So typically if someone is in like Cleveland, they might look at firms in Cincinnati and Detroit, and I don't know, but you get the idea. So she was looking around the Midwest, and I kept telling her that she needed to expand her search to other markets, but she consistently refused to do so. Every time I talked to her, I would tell her the same thing. And she said, like a lot of people, that she owned a house, her child was in school, she was a single mother, and the same sort of things. And then one weekend, I think she went to Dallas, or maybe it was Houston, I don't remember, but And I've been sending her webinars like this one, trying to convince her to look at other markets. And every time I spoke with her, I encouraged her to look at other markets. And after her trip, she emailed me and said she might be interested in Dallas or Houston or whatever this, I think it was Dallas. And so I got to work on contacting several firms in Texas and explained that she didn't have any business. And what happened was funny. They all passed and basically said they didn't have any interest. They didn't have enough work. And then something interesting happened. There was a huge law firm down there. And one day I was sitting at my desk and the phone rang and I picked it up. And it was this partner from a major law firm, like one of the, again, probably an AmLaw 50 firm, and said they passed on her resume initially, but now they were interested in hiring her and wanted to interview her. And it was one of these calls where they hadn't even met her, but it was pretty obvious that they were going to hire her just based on the phone call. And within a few weeks, she had a job as a partner there, and a good job. I think her salary was very good, and she's still there, doing very well and happy. So I have stories like this that I could tell all day, and I'll certainly tell you some more stories today as we go along. But my point is that if you're a senior attorney and you're in some specialty, you're always going to be able to find a job. You can find a job in a small, like upstart firm or a growing upstart firm. You can find a job in a large law firm. But what's happening with each of these types of searches when you're finding these jobs is that you're finding a job that typically has institutional clients that the law firm needs serviced, and they don't care about you having a lot of business. I've got examples all day. I've seen litigators that were very good at going to trial and arguing certain types of cases, but had no business. And then big law firms brought them in because they needed someone that could just do trials. There's all sorts of stories that I could tell all day long. But the point is what these attorneys are doing is they're finding, and I'm doing it for them, but they're finding law firms that have the types of work that they do. Another example that I love placing, one example would be like IP attorneys. So a lot of times patent attorneys will be very senior, and you could be like I've placed patent attorneys in their 70s, but they might have some experience doing something unusual. I don't know, working with cold fusion or just something weird. And then I can search our database and find firms that have had openings for that in the past, and sometimes moving people to ridiculous places they never thought they'd live, like moving a attorney from Syracuse, New York to Memphis to a small firm. You just never know. It's very interesting. And then there's also a lot of law firms with new practice areas. So law firms are constantly adding new practice areas, and they do it for a lot of reasons. Like sometimes I've seen insurance defense firms try to add corporate as a practice area. Sometimes the law firm wants to add a practice area because they have a client that wants to give them a specific type of work, and they don't have anyone to do it, and they know they can make money. And if the law firm doesn't do this type of work, they need to find someone that can. Some practice areas that are interesting that law firms will often start practice areas in if the right person comes along are immigration, trust and estates. There's lots of them. But if a good person comes, sometimes even tax, They want to have a tax person, maybe, sometimes bankruptcy. There's a lot of firms that do that sort of stuff. A lot of times law firms will decide they want to start a practice here. So recently I was working with a trademark attorney, and this attorney had been asked to relocate to a remote part of the United States for family reasons. I believe her daughter was going to school, or I don't know, something. I don't remember what the reason was. But and then she was in a different state, and her law firm realized that if she was working in that state, that the law firm would have to go through all these formalities and register in the state and then pay taxes in the state, and had no interest in that. And they didn't want to have a remote partner, so they let her go. And she was in her early 60s at this point, had no business, but needed to work. I believe she was paying for her daughter's school, or maybe her daughter was handicapped or something. I don't remember what it was, but she still needed the work. And I respected her a lot. She was the first woman ever to make a partner in the office of this big law firm she'd been working for. She'd had a very distinguished career in another field before becoming an attorney. I believe she was a Rockette or something, I believe, on Broadway. It was funny. And then she just overcome one obstacle after another, moving to the United States from Germany or something, and not speaking English as a first. But she just, all these different things she'd overcome. And I very much wanted to help her, but there just weren't a lot of law firms willing to hire remote partners without any business, at least not that I know of. Furthermore, she was in trademark law, which I believe at the time she was looking for a position wasn't that busy. So I was thinking about how to get her a job. And these tactics that I'm telling you about are things that you can do yourself, but I decided to just put into a newsletter out to law firms or something, or contact law firms with a message basically saying, do they have a need for anybody who is senior in anything, meaning in any practice area, to work remotely? And then I said, we have attorneys in trademark, and mentioned a bunch of different practice areas. And I sent this email out. And a lot of times when you're marketing things, like, you don't expect to get any type of response. It's really how it works. If you work with our companies, you probably get a lot of emails from BCG and Law Crossing, different things. And again, most people, when they receive marketing messages, don't respond. And so in this particular marketing message, I didn't really think too much about it. And I think I sent to 25,000 law firms, or maybe more, and with the idea of seeing if there might be any interest in her, but not doing so directly. And I received a response from a law firm. Hired partner called me up, and in Grand Rapids, Michigan. It might not have been Grand Rapids even, it might have been Muskegon. In Grand Rapids, that had a significant client that wanted to give them all their trademark work. And they couldn't believe their luck that I was contacting them with this offer, and needed a partner with world-class trademark experience so that they could plug in and do the work. They didn't care if they work remotely. They just wanted the person to travel to Grand Rapids now and then to work in the office and meet some of the attorneys. And she got a position and was able to work remotely. And incredibly, this was, I don't know, a long time ago, 7 or 8 years ago. And then I had a trademark case that I was where I was trying to enforce someone that was misusing one of our trademarks. And I called her up thinking maybe she would help me with help my attorneys that were working on it, maybe because I knew she was very good at it. And she was still working for the firm. So that's great. She was able to get a really good remote job working from Portland or something with a law firm in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So again, these sorts of opportunities, and it was a good sized firm, are great. So if you do something, if you're in some niche practice area, contacting firms that may not even have your practice area sometimes can be smart. So you ask yourself, what types of candidates can do that? Trademark, bankruptcy, different types of niche practice areas will always potentially have opportunities for you. And again, it's just the question of being at the right place at the right time and researching that. But just think, if you look at a law firm, and if a law firm does one type of thing, think, what could I do that might help that law firm? Like maybe the law firm does general corporate. Like I'm just thinking of another example. I had someone that was a senior attorney that I know of. He had, and was actually a friend of mine, and he had worked at a law firm for 10 or 11 years, then went in-house. And then when he went in-house, he had a horrible experience, ended up getting fired, and then wanted me to find him a job. And I was like, all right. And so the way I marketed him was I sent him to law firms outside of Los Angeles in like suburban areas. Suburban areas would be Long Beach, Rancho, just Palm Springs, like that sort of thing. And I don't think Palm Springs is a suburb of Los Angeles, but just smaller towns and areas around outside of Los Angeles. And he was hired by a law firm that was essentially at that point an insurance defense firm that wanted to start a corporate practice because they had a lot of clients. And he got a job there and did very well and made partner and all sorts of things, and then built that into a much better career in other firms. So again, like law firms will actually sometimes want to hire people and start new practice areas with you. And it's great for senior attorneys. Another option, I think this is the third one, are law firms opening branch offices. A lot of times law firms will open branch offices. And so one of the most interesting placements I ever made was for a partner. He had 10 days to find a new job before he was officially unemployed. And he didn't have any portable business. He'd been working for a major law firm in Los Angeles where he won major contingency verdict for one of his clients, I think, and brought in over $100 million to the law firm. And the law firm had helped him staff the case. They paid him very well. It doesn't matter, but $650,000 a year for the 3 years he worked on the matter. But he still believed that after he settled this case, they were going to give him a really big bonus for all the money he brought into the firm. And the law firm gave him what they thought was a lot of money, was $250,000. He was very upset, and he was so upset that in terms of how he voiced his concerns, which I'm assuming was not pleasant, they just said, fine, then you're just too toxic, so you better find another place to work. And they gave him a week or so to find a new job. I met him, and he wanted me to go meet him in a bar in Venice, California, which is not an area where, anyway, but then I met him there, and he was very put together and professional. And he basically told me he understood it would be very difficult to find a job in a week. He wanted to find a job in a week because he didn't want to have any gaps on his resume, because a lot of times that makes it a little bit more difficult for attorneys to find jobs. And I told him that a week was not enough time to find a job with another major American law firm. I told him that it usually takes a lot longer, because for them to make hiring decisions, it can take often 6 months. There are some firms that if you want to be a partner there, they literally will require you to go around and meet all of their partners or meet at least 5 people in each of the branch offices and things. So it can take a long time. Sometimes it can take a year, and it takes a long time. But this partner said he didn't care. He just wanted to go to a more entrepreneurial firm, and he just wanted to be in a place where his efforts would be rewarded. And as I was doing the search for him, I got a call from a law firm in Minneapolis. They wanted to open a branch office in Los Angeles, and they had all this litigation related work for major clients. They did contingency related work, and they wanted someone with his very good credentials that would impress this major client. And so it was exactly what this person was doing. And then I couldn't believe it. This happened, and within a day of this call, when I told him about this partner and got the partner's authorization to talk to him about it, he was meeting with the law firm, and within a few days he had an offer. And the law firm was funny. They thought I was extremely effective and very good. Before you start thinking about that I made this placement and everything, he didn't end up taking the offer. And instead he went to another thing that he had lined up of a law firm where he had some friends from law school working. So he felt that would be a safer move for him. And so he went to a startup firm. Kind of firm I told you about it earlier. But again, law firms open branch offices all the time. And when they do, it's often a great opportunity to get a position there. They're looking for credibility. They're looking for people that can service their clients in different cities. And it can often be a very good opportunity. Law firms will open branch offices with the expectation that they're not going to make money from them right away. And it's often, from their standpoint, it looks good just to have bodies there. So sometimes if you look at a lot of mid-sized firms, they might be based in, I don't know, Birmingham, Alabama, but then they'll say we have offices in Los Angeles and we have offices in New York. And then you'll look at the offices and like who's in them, and you'll only see a lot of times just a few attorneys. And often they're older attorneys that have been partners with other firms that may not have a lot of work, but they keep them on the website because they want to look like they have a presence there. So that's something to think about many times. Is branch offices of newer law firms that don't have a lot of attorneys there are often a great place to get positions because the law firms want to look like they have a bigger presence than they really do. They may want people that can help them with recruit or different things or service their clients or be someone. So you never know. But branch offices are always a great opportunity for senior attorneys as well. The next point is when you're a senior attorney without business, it's very important that you be geographically flexible. You need to be flexible also in terms of the size of the firm and the prestige level of the firm you go to. But being geographically flexible is very important because the more flexible you are and the more markets you're interested in, the better you're going to do. It's when I have candidates that are geographically flexible and are willing to look at a lot of markets, they always do very well. There's certain markets where you need to be admitted to the bar, which are like California and some others. But when you start looking at smaller markets outside of major markets, those markets always have a difficult time finding good people in different practice areas. And a lot of times they have big clients. One example I gave earlier was Grand Rapids. There's Steelcase and all sorts of big companies there. There's lots of work and all over in smaller markets and places that people don't think about, like San Antonio as opposed to Austin or Dallas. And so a lot of times in these smaller markets, if you're geographically flexible, there's lots of opportunities. I mean, I've placed a lot of people in New Mexico in places you would never think of, or Bakersfield, California, as opposed to other markets. So if you're geographically flexible, you're going to have a lot more opportunities. And the reason for that, regardless of whether you're senior, is law firms in smaller markets just aren't receiving as many applicants. So people open offices in places like New York and Los Angeles and Chicago because they have access to a huge labor pool, and there's more people that want jobs in those cities than there are jobs. But if you go to smaller markets, you're going to have a lot better luck. And if you're only interested in one market, you're going to have a very hard time getting a position. Then if you expand your horizon, smaller markets get calcified. So everyone knows each other. They make judgments about other firms and people. And it's just very difficult, especially if you're located in a smaller market. So when you start looking at lots of markets, you start getting lots of interviews. So I think I've told similar examples to this on this call already, but one of the things that happens a lot of times is someone might get laid off in a market like New York or San Francisco or Chicago and have a very difficult time finding a job in those markets. Many times they'll only be looking at large firms. They won't look at startup firms and smaller firms and other types of places, and they'll have a very difficult time. But when they start being geographically flexible, all of a sudden they're getting tons of interviews. One example I told you earlier was trust in the state's attorney that was very senior, maybe like in Washington, D.C. or some market like that, not getting any interviews, been home for a year, very depressed, and finally gets in touch with me, and I'm like, you have to market yourself all over. I think that person got at least lots and lots of interviews. I mean, probably at least 20. I'm just thinking, I don't remember, but it was a ton. Ends up getting a position in Scottsdale, Arizona. This is the story over and over again. Someone in San Francisco gets laid off 6 months into their job as a corporate attorney in a big firm or fired or something, decides to look at a lot of firms, ends up getting, 15 offers in smaller markets. This is what happens. So if you look at a lot of markets, the sky's the limit. The securities attorney I told you about earlier got a job in Portland from Chicago, or no, not Portland, but Seattle. And this is just what happens. So if you look at a lot of markets, there's so much going on, it's that you're much better off. One example that's very interesting is for senior litigators. If you're a senior litigator in Los Angeles or the Bay Area trying to find a position, it can be very difficult. If you're trying to get a position with a large firm representing large clients, it can be very difficult to get a position. But there's certain pockets in every area of most states where there's work. Orange County, California, not enough litigators. Lots and lots of jobs for senior litigators there. And law firms aggressively hiring people, having bidding wars for senior litigators. I've had recruiters do so well placing senior litigators in Orange County that they've broken off and started their own firms doing it. There's just in Orange County. And I don't know that Orange County is as active right now as it was, but I'm just saying there's always places that are going to be very active. And if you're geographically flexible, you're in great shape. That's the mistake that most senior attorneys make, is they're not geographically flexible. And if you're not geographically flexible, it can become much more difficult, but it drastically increases your odds. Most of the stories that I tell, by the way, of senior attorneys getting positions come when they're geographically flexible. Now, certainly looking at startup firms in your own market and looking at those sorts of things can be helpful, or branch offices of new firms. But if you're geographically flexible, you're almost always going to get positions, because how could you not? There's so many firms out there in different markets that aren't getting applicants. They're small. Just go to a search and do the top 100 largest cities in the country. And it's absolutely amazing how many firms there are and how many opportunities there are. I recently made a placement not too long ago that was completely bizarre. It was a healthcare attorney, I believe it was in Colorado, and she'd been working in the legal department for a large hospital in Ohio, and was looking for a position anywhere in the country. Now, this is funny, but this shows you what it's like when you go into other markets. She had no business. I don't think she even had law firm experience. She might have had a little bit, but meaning 6 months or something. But she'd been working in a large hospital doing some sort of legal related work. And there wasn't really anything notable about her in her education or work history. Now, because healthcare attorneys are marketable, I decided to work with her. And I typically, in certain practice areas like healthcare, that's one where, I'm interested in working with people. And she was geographically flexible. And her first interview with a Colorado law firm was a good Colorado law firm. It was like a mid-sized law firm, probably 100 attorneys or something, and a couple different offices in Colorado. And when she was interviewing, she insisted having her husband on this call during the interview with the law firm. And he was, I believe, a retired high school teacher, and he wanted to ask questions of the law firm as well. And here they were grilling the law firm. And to my astonishment, again, this is very rare, an in-house attorney interviewed by a law firm with their spouse on the phone. But the law firm brought her out to Colorado and ended up hiring her. And it was a good law firm. So this is the idea. And they needed someone with her skills in healthcare and whatever her background was. And the idea is that when you're geographically flexible, you're going to get you'll have lots and lots of options. I've made more placements than I can count. Today, there's probably 10 candidates of mine out on interviews that wouldn't be on interviews unless they were, as we speak, unless they were geographically flexible. The same thing goes with senior attorneys. I just want you to think about this, like how it works. Just think about, look, say you're I don't know, it doesn't matter what kind of attorney you are, but say you're a personal injury attorney. You can look up 100 markets in the United States, and each of those are going to have probably tons of personal injury firms in them and apply to them. Say you're a patent attorney. There's patent firms, no matter where you want to work, there's probably places. So I recently placed a tax partner from Florida and upstate New York. She'd been unemployed for over a year, had never been to upstate New York, and ended up taking a job. And I couldn't believe how lucky she was. I remember that because she was in Florida, and I don't know, it was some kind of bad situation where she was living with her mother in an apartment, and I don't know, and there's no money. And but anyway, she got a position and taking a job in upstate New York as a tax partner. And the law firm thought they couldn't believe it. They were very excited because the job had been open for quite some time. I've placed people that have been unemployed in places like Dubai and London and Asia. There's all sorts of experience. So I had a senior international arbitration attorney that had been unemployed for several years, meaning 2 or 3 years. So the situation was so bad that this particular person, I believe, was working as a contract attorney or a restaurant or something you wouldn't even expect, and very frustrated. And gone back to school. And then there was an international arbitration position that opened up in Dubai, and he was senior, like 12 or 13 years out, or maybe more. International arbitration is a type of law where there's not a lot of positions and a lot of competition for the ones that there are, especially in the US. And the reason for that is because a lot of foreigners, people that come over and get LLMs, want to get those jobs. He got a job in Dubai and with a major firm. Early in my career, I remember placing a very senior project finance attorney from Texas and Hong Kong. There were no openings in the United States at the time. That's a very difficult practice area to get a position with. And all the openings were in Asia. And so this ended up saving his career. So being geographically flexible is always going to give you a lot more options. In every city in the country, there's hundreds and hundreds of law firms that you should be applying to. And every one of these represents an opportunity for you to get a position. The other point I want to make, and this is like Harrison Barnes 101, is that when you apply to only jobs, you're really limiting yourself, because anybody that can get on any job site and apply to firms, and those are your competition. In most cases, if a law firm does put an opening online somewhere on a job site, they're going to get a lot of applicants, including ones from out of state, and you're going to be competing against them. So if you're just applying to firms because you think they're good and you're telling the law firm why you're applying, you're going to be better off. But even if you're a really good attorney in whatever market you're in, and you apply to certain places, you can do well. I've had examples where in Nashville, there's a lot of entertainment positions. You wouldn't think that, but everyone moves to LA and tries to get entertainment related positions in LA. But actually Memphis is probably a much easier place Nashville, is a much easier place to get entertainment positions than a lot of other markets. And then this is something I brought up earlier, but I just want to be very clear about this, that almost all senior attorneys that I place, now not all of them, because I was looking at some yesterday that are getting interviews, and a lot of them did look a little bit like generalists, but you have to look like a specialist. And this goes really for every attorney. Most attorneys, if you're going to get hired by a law firm, you really want to look like a specialist. The problem with being a generalist, and this is how you frame your resume, is the benefit of specialists for law firms is their clients are more impressed with specialists. You're not doing R&D, like learning a practice area. It shows a commitment. It shows you're likely to stick with them. Being an expert in something is really how law firms are set up. They have different practice areas and so forth, and they want to put an attorney in that practice area. Patent attorneys, for example, this is an example of one in his late 60s, losing a job with a big law firm in Denver, no idea what he was going to do. And again, he did a certain type of patent prosecution with a certain type of circuits. And what we do at BCG is interesting. You can actually do this on Law Crossing. No one uses this feature. I don't really know why, but you can go in and you can search what are called archive jobs. So we have a list of every single job that we've ever had on BCG. So when we see someone with a certain type of experience, which could be a certain type of patent experience or different types of experience, we can search our database and then see law firms that may have had those openings in the past. And so you can actually do that on Law Crossing too, which is cool, and then apply to those firms. So when I did a search for this particular guy, I saw that I put together a list of the firms that all ever done work on this certain type of circuit. And there were only 4 law firms in the entire country. I submitted him to them, and 2 of them ended up offering him a job. And again, it was in a city in Texas that he'd never been to, never even, I don't think, been to Texas. And everybody was very excited because they never would have found each other without my involvement. This is what happens when you're a specialist. When you're a specialist, you have the ability, you can search, for example, say you have experience in housing tax credits or something. You could you could take the list of 50 cities in the United States, and you could search for each city which firms have housing taxing special. I'm just giving you an example, or just some term that kind of summarizes what practice area you do, or some experience you have that's unusual. Because if you can find firms that do that, then you're going to be better off. So this particular guy was now practicing law in Texas, was very discouraged before I talked to him. And again, I was only able to do that because he was a specialist. You have to take your resume if you're a senior attorney, and you have to draw it out, and you have to think about how do you make yourself look like a specialist. I'll tell you who doesn't get jobs. A lot of times what happens is senior attorneys will be in-house, and then the in-house position will need to lay them off or whatever. I don't know, or they'll leave, and maybe they're voluntarily or not, but they'll go to resume coaches or outplacement people, and they'll put together these kind of long descriptions with long introductions and all sorts of recapping decades of experience. And it will be in all these different practice areas and locations and things. And the problem with that is if you look like you're not a specialist, and you do a bunch of different things, it's very difficult for a law firm that needs you to do one thing to put you into a box and hire you. So there's nothing wrong with being in any practice area, but you have to look like you're an expert in it. So you could be an expert in, I don't know, some obscure branch of education law or some obscure branch of insurance law, or in representing people injured by trucks or motorcycles. But if you're an expert in something, then law firms love that. And that's who gets hired. So you have to take whatever your resume says about doing 15 different things, and you have to summarize and make it look like you do one category of things. And because these are the people that get jobs. I want to be very clear with everybody, because this applies to associates, it applies to senior attorneys. All the examples I've told you about today, and we're almost done with this presentation before we take questions, so we're pretty close. But the point is, every example I've told you about is of an attorney that's in a specialized practice area. So I've told you about patent attorneys. I've told you about securities attorneys. I've told you about ERISA attorneys. I've told you about tax attorneys. I've told you about trademark attorneys. That these are people that are specialized, and those are the people that are getting positions, not generalists. And so if you go to a resume coach, or you think that listing all your experience is going to be helpful, it's not. You need to be specialized. And a couple of things, transactional practice areas are better for the most part, meaning patent, real estate. That's another one I told you about. Corporate and ERISA, those are usually much better if you're a senior attorney than non-transactional practice areas. And not a lot of attorneys have experience in transactional practice areas. Again, most attorneys are litigation, so that's much easier. But you need to make your resume look like you're a specialist in something, because it's not going to fly if you look like you do 15 different things. So you need to take your resume and really try to narrow it down. People are not interested in you if you say you're an expert in all things, at least larger law firms. Now, some solo practitioners and very small law firms sometimes do have people that do a bunch of different things, but it's not the kind of law firm that's usually going to have the ability to pay you a good amount of money and that sort of thing. And then the other thing is just having realistic expectations. I don't know why it says thousands. There's tens of thousands of partners all over, or maybe more, making lots and lots of money with no business, meaning you can make $3-4 million a year in some firms without any business. It's very possible to have a position in major law firms without any business. I'm very surprised. I talk to people all the time that are made partner at 9 years and their salary is $1.2 million. It's very common, or more, with some of these firms. That's just how it works. So you can do very well. And I know one firm where the partners with no business are making at least $3.5 million a year. There's a lot of law firms with huge institutional clients that will pay their first year partners over $850,000. But the problem with all this, that when you're able to make this kind of money, the example of someone that's making, this is very common. If you're able to make partner in New York at some good sized firms, $850,000 without any business is actually on the low end for some of these firms. So you can make an awful lot of money at a lot of these big law firms without any business and get hired at them. The problem with all this is that eventually it's going to catch up with you, because these law firms realize that, hey, we're paying this person all this money. They don't have any business. And not only that, but we could find someone to do the work a lot cheaper. And it typically, or maybe they've been making this for 5 years, but they haven't brought any business, their hours are low. So sometimes it lasts, and it can last your whole career, but a lot of times it doesn't. So again, what happens most of the time to senior attorneys, not always the time, maybe not even most of the time, but more than 50% of the time, is that law firms will eventually realize it's inefficient to pay people that much money to service the clients of other attorneys. It can happen in a bunch of different ways. Typically, a lot of times when things get tight, they start realizing it, or sometimes new, younger leadership comes in and wants more money for themselves and wants to be more profitable. They want to make there's just all sorts of things that happen. But the law firms will realize that there's lots of people in the market will do the work for far less money and even work harder, like senior associates. And then there's recessions. And when that happens, everyone decides how they're going to save money and where the money is going to come from. And then they start talking about things like dead weight and who's making the biggest financial contributions. Partners with a lot of business want to make more money, so they try to figure out. And so people that are without business are often let go. So I talk to these partners a lot, and who've lost business or in the process of losing, and they're used to these huge compensation levels. So they think I should be able to go to another firm and make $1.5 million a year, even though I don't have any business. And typically, when they do get offers, they're not anywhere near what they're making. And so they decide, a lot of times what they decide is, hey, if I'm not going to make this money in a law firm, I'm going to go in-house. That's what a lot of people do. Or they feel that, other law firms should pay them similar amounts. So this is an example, working with a partner from a large New York firm. He's being paid $975,000 a year without any business, and got him a position with a mid-sized firm that was willing to pay $420,000 without any business. And the law firm actually thought it was very generous and took this person out to dinner with their wife to give him the offer. And the partner that got the offer was very unhappy when he basically right away said, thank you, but no thank you. It's unacceptable. And didn't have any business. And the law firm felt like it was taking a big risk, paying him that much money without any work. I didn't have the same types of institutional clients as the law firm that was paying $975,000 a year had. And so again, you need to have realistic expectations. So just because you found a firm that would pay you a certain amount of money in the past doesn't always mean you're going to be able to find that again. You're usually losing your job because your salary is too high and it's inefficient based on what the market was willing to pay. One thing I would say that is scary, but this is just something to keep in mind, is there's a lot of times law firms will make attorneys partner when they have worked extremely hard when they're young, meaning until they're like in their 8th to 12th or 13th year, and then they'll make them partner, and they will pay them very large salaries, and they will, or draws, or however you want to put it, and they'll pay them that money with the expectation that hopefully that it will set a good example for other people working hard, but then they'll start tightening the screws after a couple of years with the person doesn't have any business, and they'll either have to leave or go in-house. So it's just important to understand that just because you're paid a lot of money at one point doesn't always mean that's an economically efficient model for the law firms. And they may have made you partner for reasons, or they may be, you may be serving a purpose, working for an extremely profitable partner with a lot of business. But again, you have to be very careful. And what is this? And then law firms will often, if you're looking for a job and you've come out of a big firm, see some risk in you, meaning I guess mental health, substance abuse, productivity, a troublemaker, and hiring, you can often be a risk. One of the things that happens, especially with young partners, and this is not really that important of a point, but a lot of times young partners won't have any business. Then they'll go out into the market acting like they do have business, and that will create problems. And so law firms are often, especially when they're hiring lateral partners, very nervous sometimes because they don't know if there's issues with that. Bringing in senior attorneys also, you just need to understand. So not only do the law firms interviewing a senior attorney see the risk, but sometimes they're also nervous because if they bring in a senior attorney to do the work, that they could be giving a senior associate, it can upset the apple cart, because then those senior associates will they want the hours, and it could hurt the advancement potential and upset the apple cart. So you just have to understand that everything is, the law firm is an organism and it functions in a certain way. It's also very expensive for some law firms to give senior attorneys work. If they're giving you work, it means partners that may be able to do the work and aren't doing the work themselves. And as sure, if you're a senior attorney, you understand that the way that most compensation, not all, but most compensation systems and law firms work is the law firms will pay partners more money for doing their own work than if they give it to others. Some law firms may pay you may receive 30% or 40% of the billable collections of your own work, but only 20% or 15% of stuff of other people's work. Law firms are also nervous that you could be a liability. Law firms get sued for discrimination all the time and threatened and have to settle and all sorts of stuff. So if a law firm hires you and it doesn't work out, they're always risking a lawsuit that would be costly. Just remember that if you're making a lot of money and you're a senior attorney, law firms see a lot of risk in hiring you, and there is, and you just need to understand that you're probably going to have a very difficult time finding a similar situation in the future. And then this is the final point, is that if you're a senior attorney, now I've already covered a lot of this, but if you need to conduct your search aggressively and do things other attorneys will not. This was an example where I hired someone that walked into my office said she'd seen an advertisement I put online months ago I had forgotten about and wondered if I was still hiring. Sometimes people do things like this and it can work out, or you can pick up the phone. I've had people pick up the phone and call me directly and leave messages saying they wanted to work for me. And in this particular case where this person walked into my office and I hadn't actually hired anybody, but ended up hiring her. And so being aggressive just means doing a lot of different things. You have to actually want the job. When we start taking Q&A in a few minutes, we'll talk about that as well. But people are more interested in hiring people that want something than those that don't. So if you think about just at home, you get mail every day with junk mail, most of which you're going to throw away. And the advertisers don't care that you rejected them. It's the same thing when you listen to the radio, you're going to hear all sorts of advertisements. And you're not paying attention to them. And the advertisers don't care either. But you need to be aggressive. You can't allow your ego to be affected by all this. And if you're looking for a job in a market and you don't feel like you're getting a nice reception, you need to be just as aggressive as you possibly can and find a job that suits your skills. Now, that's what we do at BCG with our candidates. Is we're very aggressive and try to get them out there and get seen by people, and then try to follow up with the firms and get the firms to respond. But honestly, you need to get very aggressive. Now, since you're to visit Law Crossing, you can use Law Crossing or BCG, or you can just do Google searches, but you need to find and build lists to put together places where you can apply. And you've got to stop being like a lemming and listening to only looking at jobs on job sites and only applying to certain firms. And you need to be very careful. You should be targeting all different types of firms. And again, the more places you apply to, the more likely you are to find the right opportunity. And you need to understand, that the value you can bring to a law firm, and then you need to find one that's willing to hire you. Now, I will be very direct with you that in most cases, when you're senior, the law firm that's likely to hire you is probably going to be one that doesn't even have a position. And, and fewer people are afraid to market themselves to places unless they have a position, and that's going to hurt you. And you need to be aggressive and get out there and do things. And you need to do so in a way that's going to get you results. Law Crossing works. This is not pitch for Law Crossing. So I don't know. I'm happy to talk about Law Crossing because it's our company, but you need to, like this, I didn't put that in the spreadsheet, but just, you need to do whatever you can that other people aren't necessarily doing to find jobs. And that's important. And again, sometimes paying for resume revisions or career coaches aren't going to really do you any good. There's plenty of people that will take your money to listen to you or to redo your resume. But I think that the most important thing you can do is you need to take action and really get yourself out there, meaning you need to be very aggressive and going after as many opportunities as possible. And this boldness, by the way, is what keeps so many people down. It's why the myth that it's difficult to get a new position without business continues to perpetuate. I used to have, I wish I was still doing it, but this incredible business that was very effective. It was called Legal Authority. I think the website's still up. But what we would do is someone would come in and they'd say, I want to work as this type of attorney in this market. And Legal Authority would print letters, because it was before the days of everyone using email and applicant tracking systems, but would print letters to every law firm that did a certain practice area in different markets. So it would search for all the law firms that maybe did corporate in Nevada, and there might be 300 of them, who knows? And it would send out letters, and everyone using the service that followed the service's advice would get positions, senior attorneys, junior attorney, everybody, and it works. And so this particular way of looking for jobs means you need to get out there and apply to a lot of places. And then there's this other stuff about ego, which I don't like, but I'm going to bring up real quickly. A lot of people have issues with their ego, and their ego is what keeps them back. They don't want to get rejected. And it's ego that can be bruised by rejection, or it's an ego that comes out during interviews. So the fear of rejection, honestly, just because one of the things that happens a lot of times is attorneys are coming from big firms, or they're afraid to apply to big firms, or who knows, but they're afraid of being told or not hired and they think that's going to hurt their ego. It doesn't hurt the ego of anybody that's successful if they're rejected. You need to really put your ego aside, and it's not ever a judgment on your self-worth. All it is a fact that the law firm believes may not have the work for you or can't make money from you. Just because you were a partner at a big firm or you were an associate at a big firm or whatever, getting rejected is not something you should ever care about. It's just ridiculous. Law firm people that have these egos don't get law firm positions. It's very interesting to me. So I can go through with my candidates in BCG. Like we have these different categories in our database. We have candidates that have approved all the firms and jobs we sent them. And then we have ones that haven't approved them and have some. And then we have ones that will approve some firms and the others. But the candidates that approve all the firms usually get lots of interviews. Or have interviews. So if I search and I look at all the candidates that have approved all the firms last month, and maybe 3/4 or more will have had an interview in the past 7 days or whatever. And if you look at the ones that aren't approving interviews or approving some of the firms, they won't get as many. So you need to really get yourself out there, whether it's however you do it. You can't worry about getting rejected. So a lot of people are so beaten down by not getting interviews or having unsuccessful interviews that they'll do things like start their own office, start their own firms, and that's even more difficult than many times than going to work for someone. And people fall off the face of the earth. And in terms of practicing law, by being afraid of a rejection. And I just think that's horrible. I don't like it. I think that these egos, if you look at a lot of these small firms that are started, they'll say stuff like, I didn't like how they did things at this big firm, and a lot of people will experience a lack of success and lifetime success because they're afraid of getting rejection and they're afraid of having their egos bruised. And you just need to work through that. I don't know what to tell you other than this is holding you back, and not applying to places and worried about getting rejected is horrible. It holds you. If you're a candidate of ours at BCG, what happens is we send our candidates reports every week. Sometimes people will think, oh, I didn't get any interviews, or you worked with me for these 15 firms and I didn't get any interviews. And then they say, don't ever contact me again or something, because they're thinking that we did something wrong. And yet there may be hundreds of places or a lot of places that we could potentially find them places, and people get upset. So just because you may have had an easy time getting a position before, doesn't mean that it's going to always be easy. You need to look at a lot of places. That's just how it works, especially when you're senior. You need to be able to get out there and talk to a lot of places. You can't worry about your brand. Everything is, do you think Rolls-Royce sells a lot of cars? And they don't. Do you think it's easy for you have to, every product, especially the more unique the product is, gets rejected. I bring this up because if you are listening to what I'm saying and you're not applying to a lot of places, or you're saying, I would never do that, then you're hurting yourself. Every interview you get is an opportunity to learn more and to network and to get better at interviewing. And I just bring this up because I see it so much. I see it every day. We'll do stuff like just give you an example. I might have a corporate attorney, and a lot of people are getting laid off right now. This is not a good market. And if you look at this point in time, and they're saying the job openings are shrinking and everything, but I'll have a corporate attorney in some market and lost their job, and they'll come to us, and then I'll be like, that's great. So I'll send them, I won't say that's great, but I'll have a way of fixing it. So I'll send them like 20 firms that are mid-sized firms or that have interviewed corporate people like them from us in the past 3 months. And I'll send them, and basically I know that those firms are likely to have an interest. And the person will be like, oh my God, there's so many 20 firms. This is horrible. What is this guy thinking? And yet I will have sent them very specialized information that I know is going to get them a job. But they will ignore it and think that I'm trying to hurt them or something by sending them a bunch of positions, and yet are firm names. And so being afraid to apply to places, thinking you're going to get rejected, it's just how it works. And you need to market and sell your products. That's part of your job as an attorney, and especially a senior one. And if you don't effectively market yourself, you will go out of business. What do you think Trump and Musk and all these people are doing all the time? They're marketing themselves, and they're building businesses around it. And you need to do the same thing. And I'm not making any judgment calls about these people, but if a business doesn't market itself effectively, if a politician doesn't market themselves, do you think a politician that's getting shouted down by the other side all the time is allowing that to affect themselves personally? You're a Democrat, you're getting attacked by the Republicans. If you're a Republican, you're getting attacked by the Democrats. You get knocked down, you get up and you try again. And that's what you need to do with your job search. You are not immune to having to fight to get a job or to get out there. It's just part of the game. And when a law firm rejects a candidate, it's not like they care. They just say no, or they don't respond. They just take a look at the resume and make a quick decision. Sometimes the wrong person's looked at your resume. Sometimes your resume just goes into a email box and no one may open it. Sometimes someone you don't know, and it's nothing to worry about. The law firm's just making a quick business decision, or they might not have the work or the money, or they might have had the work at one point, now they don't. But who cares? Just if you take a look at, if there's 25,000 people in your city, wherever you live, I don't know, in your suburb, they may send out, someone that does roofing may send out 25,000 letters to every house or 10,000 houses or whatever to get one roofing job. They don't care. Who cares that 25,000 people didn't respond? If they get 1 or 5 roofing jobs, they paid for it. You really cannot think about this, and you can't worry about it. And I just would caution you on that. And then this is just a final few. When a law firm's interviewing a senior attorney, they're basically asking, can you do the work? Can you be managed? Will you do the work long term? And I don't need to talk about this very much until we get to the Q&A, but most senior attorneys, the answer is no. So a lot of times senior attorneys will think different types of work are beneath them, so they won't like that, and that's a problem. And then I've placed a lot of senior attorneys in smaller firms. Sometimes they quit because they don't have access to the same things that they might have had in a larger law firm. And one of the things that I would recommend is people like people that are hungry. So you always want to, if someone's willing to offer you a job and you're senior, or willing to offer you different types of work, you need to come at it enthusiastic, with a lot of enthusiasm. The other thing that I would caution you, and again, I'm getting into a lot of detail here, and this is probably a lot more than I need to say, but I want to make sure I say it because I want you to succeed. When you're a senior attorney, law firms will also get very nervous because they're used to, a lot of times senior attorneys are used to calling the shots, and that's not something, and they believe that they have a lot more experience and that their judgment is calcified and so forth. They're used to giving orders and so forth. You have to be very careful and look like you're willing to be a soldier many times and not a general. You have to figure out what they need, but that means just carrying out orders and so forth, and respecting people that give you jobs, and knowing how to be someone that goes out and just basically does what they ask for. And that can hold a lot of senior attorneys back. So they'll go into employers, and many times people much younger than them, and they'll act like they know everything, and that's not good. So you need to be seen as someone that's going to make those in a position of power feel important and valued, and like you're going to basically follow their orders. And then finally, giving people the ability to believe you're going to stick around long term is another important thing. The idea is that the law firm wants to believe that you're going to commit. This is just a conclusion, but I was speaking to an attorney recently. His wife had divorced him. He'd imagined, I told him, he imagined that it must have been very difficult for him. I didn't meet new people after working long hours and having to start his dating life again. And he explained to me that he joined all these dating sites and been out on 75 dates in 6 months, and he was meeting people all over the country. It was funny, I spoke to him and he was in like London. I don't know why he'd go to London to meet someone. He was from Texas, I believe. But he said there's so many people that on each date, he was looking for reasons to eliminate people because there was so much opportunity out there. And he said he had to tell several women they were too young, made too much money, and all these things were funny. And but at the same time, when he was telling me the story, it reminded me of the job market, because that's how I think about it. And the incredible number of opportunities are out there for people that are willing to put themselves out there. So this guy that his wife divorced him was very depressed and thought the world was ending, and then all of a sudden realized how much opportunity there is out there. And it's like that for legal jobs as well. The problem is that senior attorneys, junior attorneys, everyone is not getting out there and doesn't know how to market themselves and is really under-marketing themselves. There's certainly nothing like a dating site for attorneys, but if there were a dating site for attorneys, meaning a place where employers and job seekers could be matched and that sort of thing and chat with each other, then you would definitely see how many people are interested in you. But the way things are, you have to get out there, and you really should not have a problem getting a position. Now, if you are, regardless of your seniority level, if you have a specialty and you're eager to work and you look hireable, you will get a job. And if you don't market yourself, you're not going to get a job. Everybody that doesn't market themselves properly, whether it's trying to meet someone that's a significant other, or it's a musician or an actor or a writer, or anything, if you don't market yourself, you're going to fail. And so you have to really realize how important this is in terms of really getting outside of yourself and doing all this. So I'm going to take a quick break. And then when I come back, I'm going to answer questions about this. I apologize if it was a little bit of a longer webinar, but I did want to do a little bit longer webinar here because I think this is a really important issues. I mean, in terms of senior attorneys getting business, because it's just so many people give up and it's just so dumb, or they think they can't get a job. And so I tried to cover all those things today. And then if you were here, this will be put up for you to watch again, probably within by Monday or Tuesday of next week. I'm going to take questions about today. But I'll also, if you were on the webinar last week, I did have to cut it short. I believe I was getting a flight or something, but so I've actually saved the questions from last week as well. So I'll try to answer those. Last week, I think, was about interviewing, but I'll answer some of those questions as well. But I'll stay as long as it takes to get through all these questions. And I'll be back in just a minute. There's a lot of questions because we also have ones from last week. So I'll try to do some of the ones from this week first. Okay, so this is a good question. Oh, by the way, too, is people don't want their names showing up. So if your name's showing up in the Zoom, I won't show your name or anything like that when I answer it. Okay, so this question is, if startup firms are not in directories and don't advertise, how do you find them and how do you know if they're hiring? Okay, so the first thing with the startup firms is directories cost money. So that's one of the biggest problems with directories. They cost money. So any law firm directory that you find out there, now there are some that may not, like FindLaw and all these different directories. Now, again, don't quote me on that, but almost all of them cost money for firm. So firms don't really need to be in directories to be found. The biggest way to find them is pretty much using a search engine like Google or even Google News. And then also, this is a new recommendation, is ChatGPT. ChatGPT can be used to find firms in different areas. An example of these searches. So again, directories, everyone uses directories, and they're not the best sources to find startup firms. The reason they're not the best source is just because they're going to show you what people are paying to put there. And they're also not as sophisticated as something like Google, because Google is searching the internet all the time. And when it sees a new law firm website, it's going to index it and so forth. So Google is a great way to find stuff, and it's going to show you the information regardless. What's in the law firm site will display. It's going to show you the information regardless of someone's paying to put it there. So that's what's so awesome about Google. So you can use Google to find firms. They're very effective. You can say this type of firm doing this practice area in a different city, in certain cities, and we'll show you. Google and Google News are also, Google News is also good, or just news. So you search Google and there's a button on Google where you can search for news. And you could even set up, you could just say, I want to know news about some new firm or something. You do searches like that. But Google News can show you stuff. And then ChatGPT is actually fairly interesting too. So you could say, what are some, the information is not necessarily current, but you could just say, what are 10 law firms in, I don't know, you could say, what are 25 law firms in Savannah, Georgia, in and around Savannah. I'm just giving you an example, in and around Savannah, Georgia, that do trust and estates or something like that. And just ask questions like that. So I think ChatGPT is going to be a real game changer. Now, the problem with the data that you're getting from ChatGPT is it's not a real-time search engine, so it's not going to give you the most relevant results right away. So meaning they may give you results from 2 years ago. You could even say with more than 5 trust and estates attorneys or something. But you can definitely use ChatGPT to give you things. But yeah, directories are not the best use of your time, really. They're going to help you to some extent. I think Chambers is very good. At BCG, we build directories onto our site and so forth. But honestly, when new law firms are becoming available, then Google is often the best way to find them. I'll just tell you how many law firms there are out there. That's so freaking amazing. When someone applies to BCG, if they're at a certain firm, we're always looking to see what that firm is, and if we have them in our database. And we find lots of new firms every day that we didn't know about. And even though we've had over 50 people doing research for years on firms. We're learning about new ones every day. You do need to use Google's good just because Google will, any firm, anybody that opens a website, you could open a website called bigjimslawfirm.com and Google would find it right away, like very quickly. And then it would start coming up in search results. Okay, so let me just see here. A lot of questions from last week. Okay, let's see here, this question, 1 second. Okay, switch to a firm with securities litigation, but realize most of the work they're doing is insurance defense for professional responsibilities, which I don't like. I only have one securities case now. I worked at my prior firm for 7 months and switched to my current firm for securities work. When do you think I should switch firms again if I want to work at a large firm in securities litigation? What can I do to improve my position? Okay, so this is a common type of question. And a lot of people run into this position where people get into a position where they're not doing the work that they wanted to. And this is a very common type of question. And you're not going to like my answer, but I'm going to just give it anyway. Most firms are businesses. And so if they don't have a certain type of work, like the one you want to do, they'll just give you whatever they have. And unfortunately, it sounds like you're doing what they give you, which is good. So you need to just continue doing the type of work that the firm's given you. But at the same time, if you do want another position, you need to be very careful. What happens typically, so you may move your first job after 7 months or a year or 2 years. And then if you move again to your second job and you stay at your second job for a year, and then you move, people start making conclusions about you. And the only logical conclusion that they can make is that you're either unhappy where you go, or you're being asked to leave or whatever, and you're not going to stick around. So, that's a problem. So you need to be very careful. If I don't know why a law firm would hire you to do securities related litigation and then not have that work. That's strange that you would move for that and have the work. So if I would ask them if I could get more of that type of work and try to gravitate towards partners that do have that work in the firm. A lot of times what happens is if you're not aggressive about seeking out the kind of work you want, they'll just give you the kind of work that they want you to do. That's how it works in every firm. So there's always partners that no one wants to work with or that have different types of work that may. So your first task would be to try to get work from the type of someone that has securities litigation. And then if that doesn't work out, then you may have to move. But unless you find a place that does nothing but what you want to do and you're not getting that kind of work, then your only other option is just to stay where you're at and continue doing what you want to do. If you really want to do securities litigation, you are going to need to find a law firm that does that. And so you're in a bad situation. But I would recommend, if it were me, I would try to, sorry, I'm just trying to look at this again. I would try to find a firm that does that. I would try to do the best you could at your existing firm and try to get work from partners at your firm that have it. And that's what happens, especially, I don't know how aggressive you are, but again, a lot of firms will just give you lots of different types of work other than what you want to do, unless you are aggressive in seeking it out. So that means I would try to find partners in your firm that have that type of work. And then if you do, get that work. So how much does board certifications help as a credential? I think it can help a lot in certain practice areas. It depends on the practice area. But in California, for example, they have it for family law and other things. And I think it is actually a meaningful credential. So you have to have a certain amount of experience doing something. And the other thing I like about the board certifications is they actually make you like experts in something. Very few people are experts in a practice area. But if you get a board certification, it's almost like being in a practice area. Some of the board certifications are silly, like appellate law and things. But for the most part, I think they're actually very useful and they show that you're an expert. I think they're good for clients. They're good for firms and all sorts of things. And we're good for getting clients, and getting jobs. So I think that they're very useful. Now, there's some major law firms that wouldn't care about it. But for the most part, I think board certifications are a really good idea. Okay, let's see. Okay, let me just get another one. Sorry. Let's see here. Okay, so this is another example. What are some effective strategies for senior attorneys who have been out of the job market for a while and need to update their skills to be competitive in today's job market? Okay, so this is actually a really good question. It may seem like a regular type question without a lot of substance, but it actually is a very substantive question. So I think that the way a lot of people think about being an attorney and going to school and so forth is that you get out of school and then that's it, you're done learning and so forth. And in order to be in any profession, you should have a lot of interest in it. So you should have, I'll just give you an example myself. I'm going next week to a marketing conference. Now, I don't personally do a lot of marketing, but I'm going to spend 3 days, or maybe the week after next, at some conference in Atlanta learning about marketing, just because I like it's relevant to learning how attorneys can market themselves and learning, it's just relevant to my job. And every week I'm writing or doing these webinars and trying to write articles and things about what I do. And so being a lawyer is no different. If you need to really think about it, and this is a piece of advice for everyone, is you constantly want to be learning and developing your skills and reading and going to conferences and trying to be as enthusiastic as possible. It's not a job. So being a lawyer is a profession and not a job. So it's a job would be if you're working on an oil rig and your job is to operate a switch or something, that's a job. But a profession is a whole bunch of things. Being on this webinar is something that you should be doing. Being on a webinar is learning this stuff and answering questions shows it's a profession. You should be learning all the time and updating your skills. Just today, if what you learned about is, about if you're a senior attorney, is about your profession. So it's a profession, and it's a profession. That means you should always be learning and reading and getting all the information you can. So that's how you keep your skills updated. And you do continuing legal education. You take a lot of interest in it and a lot of pride in it. And because not everybody can be an attorney, you have to have a license and you have to go to school and all these different. So the way to keep your skills up, and this is for everybody, is you should, from a career standpoint, you should be going to webinars like this or learning about different things about your career. And then you should be learning things about your practice area. And you should be learning about the legal market that you're in, meaning reading the legal news in different areas that you're in and so forth. And that's what a profession is. And very few people, by the way, think of their job as being a profession. They just think, oh, I'm going to get here, I'll do the work they give me, blah, blah, blah. But if you take it seriously, there's very few people that do. So if you take it seriously and you become very interested in what you're doing, then all of a sudden clients want you. And then all of a sudden law firms want and see what you are about, because so many people are just doing things as a job. And so you really want to do it as a profession. So that would be my biggest piece of advice, is to constantly look at what you're doing as being a profession and not just a job. Okay, how would you advise a senior attorney who has recently been laid off or forced to retire due to age discrimination? What steps can they take to re-enter the job market and find a position in a law firm? Okay, so there's a couple of things that I want to just be very clear about. And then I'm going to talk about some things you don't want to know about, then I'll talk about some things you may want to know about. So one of the things that I've noticed that in a lot of firms, and again, this doesn't mean you can't get a job, but it makes it hard to get a job. In big markets, like big markets would be your largest, most competitive markets. So without naming names, I'm sure, but in the largest, most competitive markets, the law firms have their choice of people. I mean, they can hire people, especially at large law firms, because they get applicants all day and there's a lot of people that want to work there. And what happens a lot of times is they realize that if they hire someone that's been laid off or let go for age reasons or stuff, or even a junior attorney that's been laid off, that the person may come at everything with kind of a case of sour grapes. And what that means is they're mad, they need to protect themselves, they're angry at the world and angry at employers for messing with their self-esteem and pulling the rug out from under them. And so they come in with sour grapes. And that's very common, by the way. And people that are hired with sour grapes are obviously bad for the firm's morale. So you have to come at things like you have to really put yourself in the situation. And I know this is hard, especially if you're laid off for age discrimination, but you have to put yourself in the situation of your firm and that let you go, and basically say their work was slowing, they didn't have the work or whatever, I still like them, and really be positive, even as hard as it is to be. But you have to try to be positive, because if you're not, then law firms are going to pick up on that and they're not going to want to hire you. And you're going to, even though you're not maybe showing that, it's just not going to it's not going to do well. It's just not a good idea. So the first thing is, anybody that's been laid off, anybody that's angry, anybody that has problems with their existing employer, when they're looking for a job, anybody that's mad, you have to talk yourself out of that, because you'll go into interviews and you go into your next job and it won't work out. And that's the first thing. No matter, even sour grapes, just one of the reasons that law firms like to maybe avoid people to some extent that are not working, because they're afraid that they're going to bring that anger to their next job. And I can tell you just from personal experience, and again, this is, I don't know if it's off the record, but I would talk to candidates all the time, and my candidates would get fired. And I would say, this is awful. Like, how could somebody from this huge law firm get in these great qualifications lose their job? I'm going to hire them because I want to help them. And then those people that were fired, usually after a period of time, sometimes they're angry at their next employer, and then they fire their employer, and because they're mad at what happened in the past, and so they come at things with a wrong perspective. Now, has that always happened? No, but it happens a lot with people that are laid off. So you need to get rid of this whole sour grapes thing. I know it's not easy, especially if you're discriminated against from age discrimination. Not good. So I'm completely on your side. I just want you to know that you need to get rid of the sour grapes thing. So what can you do to re-enter the job market and find a position in a law firm? All the things that I told you about today, which is to really get out there and apply to a lot of different places. And so you need to, the first thing is you need to focus your resume on a practice area, meaning you need to look like you do one thing. And what that means is, regardless of what your practice area is, it needs to look like, you need to look like an expert in something. And then you need to look like an expert in something. And then you need to apply to a lot of places, as many places as you can find. One of the things too, I want to tell everybody, and I'm going to start sending this out to all of my candidates at BCG, but there's a series of articles for employers on BCG. So let me just read a series of articles. BCG for employers. And it basically tells employers how to hire people. And it goes through these things that I talk about every week, but from the employer's point of view, can you do the job? Can you be managed? Do you want the job? Will you do the job long term? I don't know. Do we like you? I don't know, there's maybe another one, there's 6 of them. But so can you do the job basically is your experience. That's whatever's on your resume. If you're an expert in something and you've been doing it before, that means you can do the job. So the other big ones where people blow it are, can you be managed? Meaning what a lot of senior attorneys will do is they will have things on their resume that make it look like they're in charge of leading and doing all these things, and think that they're in charge and stuff. And if you're trying to work for someone else, that doesn't always go over well. And so a lot of times people won't get jobs because they don't look like they can be managed. So that would be one of the things that I would say that is important. And then wanting the job. The people that I hire, and I've always wanted to hire, are people that really want the job. They're like, wow, I really want to work there. And there are people that come across that way. Like, the employer doesn't need to talk you into anything. Like, you're sold. And if that's usually the person's first choice, any employer, if you really go in there and you act like you really want this job and you're enthusiastic, they're gonna really want to hire you. I'll never forget it. And this is actually very interesting. So I was young. I've been doing this recruiting job for maybe 5 years. And I had been very successful, like, very quickly. And I had built this office. It cost me like, I don't know how but like $7 million or something. This is a long time ago. And I had several hundred people working for me. And I don't know, maybe 600 or something at the point. It's just, couldn't believe, actually, I think I've been doing it for 4 years, how successful I've become. And I started this law crossing and BCG, and I had these beautiful new offices I'd built. Anyway, but I was doing very well. So I was interviewing people for a CFO job. And this one guy came in and he was old. He was like probably, I would say in his mid 70s. And he had all this stuff on his resume, like how he was a venture capitalist and done all this stuff. And I was like, why is this guy interviewing with me? He's this kid that's been very successful early on, but why would he be interviewing me? So most of my questions were like, this guy was just thinking I'm a punk. He's never experienced some early luck in my company, but why would this guy want to work for me? And he's going to think he knows everything. And so what happened, it was very interesting. So after this interview, which was basically me expressing incredible, wow, like why would some guy that is vested, has more money, obviously, than I'll ever want to work for me? But anyway, so that was kind of how I think. And then what happened is after the interview, and I said, thanks, he walked towards my desk and he put his hands on the desk, or I don't know what he did, but he said something like, if you give me this job, I'm going to work harder than anyone. And this is a job I really want. And I'd really think I'd really like this opportunity. And I never forgot that because no one ever does something like that. Like no one ever asked, and I didn't hire him. I ended up hiring someone that looked like with this kind of hotshot background, and things didn't end up working out. And I sued them, or I fired them, and they sued me. I fired them because they weren't coming into work until 1:00, and then showing up with dogs and everything. It was a disaster. And so I should have hired this guy, and I didn't. But it was someone that really wanted the job. And so very few people do that. Like very few people go into interviews and act like they really want the job and it would be meaningful to them. And that particular guy that really wanted the job is a real mistake. I should have hired him, even though he was older. If you really want the job, people will hire you. I've hired a lot of people just because they wanted the job. And very few people actually are able to convince you. But I just think about it. I remember that guy 20 years ago because no one ever did anything like that. And then the other things are, will you do the job long term? And do we like you? And long term just means, do they think you're going to stick around? And so I think the reason will you do the job long term is important is because you can see here this early question where someone says they're doing insurance defense and they want to switch jobs. Like these are all questions that law firms are asking when they're interviewing you. And if you look like you're not going to stick around, they will hire someone that does. And if you look like you don't want the job, they're going to hire someone that does want the job. If you think back by all the jobs you've gotten and everything, the jobs that you get are often going to be ones where you really wanted the job because people pick that up. And if you don't want the job, you're going to communicate that as well. I really would recommend that as much as you can get done. Do you have advice for senior? Okay, so this is a good question. This is from someone that wants to work in-house and is a senior attorney. So I do have advice for senior attorneys that want to work in-house. So in-house jobs are interesting. So it's almost like the same thing a lot of times that happens in law firms. Most in-house jobs, not all of them, but a lot of them, when companies are hiring in-house, there's a couple different types of attorneys that they'll hire. But if you're looking, you don't want to be general counsel or something, and you're just looking for like an in-house job, the most in-house jobs go to attorneys that are, if they're hiring from a law firm and it's a big company, they're going to want to hire people from big law firms that have immediately transferable skills that are fresh. Let's say you're a tax attorney and you're working at a big law firm in New York and you want to go in-house to Google or something. Like they're going to be more comfortable hiring a 7th or 8th year tax attorney than they will be like a 20 or 30 year tax attorney, just because they want people that are bright and bushy tailed and are more likely to do work rather than that sort of thing. So the problem with in-house jobs, so I talk to companies all the time, and I don't make in-house placements, by the way, because I do make in-house placements, but I don't by any stretch of the imagination specialize in it because it's anyway, I don't want to get too far into it, but it's a different animal that doesn't have a clear set of rules and where there's a lot of problems with it. But what in-house happens at in-house companies is most in-house companies want to hire people not to come in and manage outside counsel and to tell them what they can and can't do. And they want that, but they really want people to come in and actually do the work. Because if you come in and do the work, it saves them money. And so if they're currently spending $2 million a year on outside litigation that they think an in-house person can do for $300,000, that's going to make them happy. And so what happens with a lot of in-house attorneys is, especially for senior attorneys, when they're going in-house, view themselves as someone that is getting a job where they're in power and where they can direct outside counsel and where people are going to kowtow to them and they can give other people business and so forth. And what I would advise anybody that's looking for an in-house job is almost all companies that hire in-house people, when it doesn't work out for them, they're upset because their in-house counsel isn't doing work and is feeding a lot of work to outside counsel. So if you're trying to get an in-house counsel job, my best piece of advice is you need to look like someone that's willing, that wants to do work, that wants to save them money, that can do work more efficiently than outside counsel, that's an expert in a certain practice area, and that sort of thing. But what happens in most in-house companies, and this is something I hear over and over again, is that they hire an attorney, usually a lot of times from a big firm, and they think they're going to save hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more, by bringing them in. And then that attorney ends up finding more work to be done by the firm that they came from or by another law firm, and ends up costing them more money. Your job, when you're getting a job in-house, now there's different in-house jobs, and some in-house jobs may want people to do nothing but manage outside counsel. But your job, when you're trying to get a job in-house, really is and one of the ways to really get a job in-house, if you're trying to get one, is to make sure the law firm believes that you can save them a lot of money. Yeah. The in-house company. And if they think that, they're more likely to hire you. And so most people, and I've had this happen over and over again when I'm trying to place people in-house, like a lot of times the in-house people want to be people that are looking for in-house jobs want to be in a position where they're getting control and they're in charge of budgets and all this stuff when the company's really looking to save money. Okay, what do you think of placing senior military attorneys with 20 plus years who previously specialized in law of armed conflict, government ethics, and investigations? Okay, that's a good question. One of the biggest problems, it's very funny with a lot of times with military resumes, there's a certain format they follow. And it's, I don't know why, I don't know what it is, but the resumes tend to look like, and there's all these honors and different things that are meeting goals and quotas and things that are always on military resumes. And I don't know why they look that way. But if you're trying to get a position, and many times the military resumes and the mentality it's a different type of mentality many times than law firms have in terms of the directness and it's actually okay. There's nothing wrong with it. So what do I think of placing military attorneys? So the problem with if you have 20 years of experience in the military is how are you going to communicate to the law firms how your experiences are transferable to paying clients? So a law firm needs to believe that that you're an expert in some sort of practice area or can learn a certain practice area that they have. And so that's part of the issue there is what does it look like? You're basically under the same, and I shouldn't say this, but it's often very difficult to place military attorneys. Now, that's not to say that it's impossible, because it's not. But it can be difficult. You said internal investigations are something, but how do you place a government attorney? So the first one is, can you do the job? So what is the practice area that you would go into? Is it litigation? Is it, I don't know. What is it? How does that transfer? And then, can you be managed? Yes. Most military attorneys definitely look like they can be managed. And that's one of the things that the military does very well. But can you do the job? Will you do the job long term? Most of them look like that. And do we like you? Being likable as a military attorney, obviously people that are of different political persuasions don't like the military. Some political persuasions really like the military. You have to think about, what are you going to do to make your experience look like it is transferable? And that's one of the problems of military attorneys. So there's certain branches of the military, which you could be in the JAG and prosecuting or defending criminals, which is obviously you can transfer, or people that military crimes, that those skills are often very transferable to criminal law, but many different types of military attorneys aren't. And so you need to understand, how can you package your experience in a way that law firms like. I will tell you that certain firms, which are personal injury, plaintiffs, and a lot of people that do in a lot of practice areas where the starting salaries are not high, are willing to train people. That's one. Another thing I would recommend if I was a military attorney, I would search for attorneys that have been career military people in whatever market and talk to them and ask them for advice, because there are going to be lots of people like that, and they'll have stories and things to share with you. They might say, this is how I find a job. It was tough. And I would try to find as many of those people as I could. So I would say you do the same thing. You would search Google, and I'm not going to tell you what to search. It could be, if you want to work, you'd say something like whatever U.S. Army, I don't know, U.S. Army, or whatever the government branch or some big government branch. And then you would say brand attorney, Minneapolis, I don't know, something like that. And then but come up with different searches to find those types of people. Maybe there's directories for the military. But again, this is a good question, because I don't know exactly what you do, and it doesn't really matter, but you're going to have to figure out how you're going to position yourself. The problem with military resumes is a lot of times they'll just list like all this different stuff and all these different awards, and it's very difficult to make sense out of it. It's almost like they're in a different language compared to what you need to do to get a job in a law firm. So that's what I would recommend. But I would try to talk to some people and research people that have done it, and then reach out to them and get answers that they may have. Okay. And that's really the best advice I could give. And I definitely, it's very interesting. There's certain firms like in Washington, D.C. that love hiring military attorneys. There's others, but you have to have some sort of experience. Okay. So senior attorneys have been out of the job market for several years and maybe unsure how to approach the job searches process in today's market. If you've been out, I don't know how long you're saying you've been out, but if you've been out of the job market and you're senior for several years, the law firm, again, you have to always go back to these questions and really ask yourself, like, and again, I would recommend reading this. It's also on BCG under the employer section, but seeing how you would answer these questions. The biggest thing that law firms worry about when they're hiring people that have been out of the market is they worry that they may not want the job or they may not stick around. They used to say that once someone stops practicing law, a lot of times, and they've been out for a while, like a couple of years or a year, it's very difficult for them to go back, because why would they? It's too much stress. It's a dog-eat-dog world. There's just all sorts of problems many times with working in a law firm. And so many times law firms will not want you back, or you won't want to go back. So you have to look like you really want the job. And then you have to have some compelling reasons, maybe why you're out of the job. But ultimately, if the law firm feels they can make money off you and they have the work, then they're going to hire you. Other things I would recommend would be sometimes just calling around or messaging people and saying, do you have any work? Is there anything I can do to help you? Can be very helpful, and you can get jobs that way. So I've hired people to help me like that before, and it does work. So that's what I would do. But you have to have some sort of, if you're applying for jobs, you have to have some sort of story or a reason that you haven't been working, a reason that you're going to commit to when you're coming back. And again, the more specialized your practice area is, the more law firms are going to be interested in you, because it's very difficult for law firms in smaller markets that may have the work to find experts in different types of things, whether it's trademark law or different trust in estates or whatever. If you're a specialist in something, even if you're senior, law firms are often going to be very likely to hire you. Okay, so this person says this is an attorney that's doing family law. Okay, so this person said, I'm currently a family law attorney in Utah. Is there a subspecialty I should be working on? I'd like to transfer to Arizona. Yeah, family law is very easy, by the way. In terms of practice areas, it's one of the easiest jobs to get positions in for attorneys. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but one of them is that there's tons of family law firms all over, and they need family law attorneys. I had an instance, I don't know if I talked about it last week or a couple of weeks ago, where I had a family law attorney that was in a small market in Colorado, or I don't know what the market was, and wanted to move to a small market in Wisconsin, and got 7 interviews or something and 5 job offers. There's just a lot of opportunity for attorneys in family law. There's certainly specialties within family law, but just being a family law attorney specializing in divorce or Sometimes they specialize in things like adoption or whatever. You can do very well. I met a girl not too long ago that was working in Los Angeles that had a big practice and was doing millions of dollars a year helping same-sex couples with adoptions. But it was big practice, millions of dollars that she was bringing in. It was her and two attorneys helping her. So there's just all sorts of practice areas that you can work on. And if you transfer to Arizona, just saying you're a family law attorney and putting in the different types of work you do won't be that difficult in most cases for you to get a position. Family law attorneys are very marketable. It's just that's all you've been doing. And again, it can be very unpleasant too for family law. Okay. I'm a senior law with no business. I have experience in separate areas: med mal, government, general liability, condo, insurance coverage, landlord, tenant. Should I create a separate recipe for each field in which I've worked? Okay, this is interesting. A lot of times, and this is a very common type of resume, by the way, a lot of times people will have experience in a field which is basically insurance defense and insurance coverage. My guess is that most of what you're doing is related to insurance defense and medical malpractice. That's okay, and that's marketable. And you can certainly put that you've done a little bit of landlord tenant. Or you could be insurance defense and insurance coverage, or you could be insurance defense and medical malpractice. But those are very similar. So a lot of insurance defense attorneys will have experience in insurance coverage, but just insurance defense generally is actually okay. And you could even throw in med mal as part of that. Now, med mal defense is probably more marketable than just insurance defense. So if you're like 51% medical malpractice and the rest of it is other stuff, I would call myself a medical malpractice attorney with this other types of experience. All this stuff about landlord tenant and stuff, it doesn't sound like it's a very significant portion of your practice, so I really wouldn't emphasize that. What we do, if you go to BCG onto the website and just go to the homepage and you look at the practice areas, we look at over 300 different practice areas. But what we'll typically do is we'll have a primary practice area and a secondary. So you need to figure out, what is your primary practice area? Like, what do you spend the most of your time doing? And then you can have secondary practice areas, but which could be like your landlord tenant, all that stuff. But if I was you and I had that type of resume, I would basically call myself insurance defense, if that's mean, that specializes in medical mal and general liability. And then maybe depending on the coverage, you could put that in there as well. But insurance defense, again, very marketable practice area. It's very funny because recruiters, we place tons of insurance defense attorneys, and it's a very marketable practice area. Medical malpractice is a very marketable practice area. Most recruiters only work with corporate or litigation from big firms, but these are very marketable practice areas. Even if you're senior, there's certainly plenty of opportunity for attorneys to do that. But you have to figure out, and goes for everybody, what do you call yourself? What do you spend most of your time doing? Calling yourself an insurance coverage attorney is not really accurate unless you're doing insurance coverage is a very marketable practice area, but unless you're doing a lot of insurance coverage, you shouldn't really call yourself insurance coverage. And so this sounds more insurance defense doing these other things. That's how I would market it. Again, very marketable practice area. And I do recommend to everybody, whatever your practice area is, you just need to break it down. One of the things and focus on it. This is a very honest description of the practice area. Sometimes people will think, oh, I need to look more like a general commercial litigator, and that's better than being an insurance defense attorney. Well, actually, insurance defense attorneys are probably, as they get more senior, more marketable than commercial litigation. So while commercial litigation may often pay more, in big firms at least, insurance defense is often much more marketable and there's a lot more work. So then insurance coverage is certainly a practice area that's done in big firms, but that's how I would worthwhile it. And then this is a good question here. It says, let me see here. Is it worthwhile to reach out to law firms even though no position posted? Absolutely. That's the smartest thing you can do. Yeah, I could talk about this all day, but when you apply to a firm, give me 1 second. When you apply to a firm without an opening, I'm sorry, my vision isn't the greatest, but when you apply to a firm without an opening, you're the only applicant. and the firm is flattered to get the application. So it's great. It's like the smartest thing you can possibly do if you are a good fit. So I recommend everybody apply to firms without openings. I don't know what the statistics are now, but at one point at BCG, I researched it and we did up the numbers, and it was something like 85% of our placements were with firms that didn't have openings. So think about that, like an entire company built on firms without openings. So do I recommend you apply to firms without openings? Hell yeah. You'd have to be out of your mind not to. And again, this is something that no one does. And it's very simple, because if you're applying to firms without openings, you're the only applicant. So if a firm has an opening, they could receive hundreds of applicants. And if they receive hundreds of applicants, every new applicant is an annoyance, as opposed to only one applicant for a firm and people love that. They'll look at it. It's, if you have 100 applications or 200 applications to look at, that's a lot of work, and it's just, you have to plow through them. But if you get just one applicant, it's got your attention, especially small law firms that don't have a lot of applicants. So that can be very helpful. Okay, so let me just see here. 1 second. Hang on 1 second. Sorry, I'm just bringing this next question up. Okay, when is it worth for a civil litigator working for a municipality to take a pay cut for what appears to be more potential for future growth? How do you make the decision? How much of a pay cut is worth taking for the future growth? Okay, so this is a very good question. And so civil litigator taking a pay cut. I think government versus private practice is basically the question. So here's what I think about that. If you're working for a municipality as a litigator and you're making a good salary, that is stability. It's authority, because you're working for a government. So you have that credibility, and you may be able to get pensions and security, better hours, more leeway in terms of the quality of your work. I don't know, but there could be all sorts of benefits of that. And then to go to work in private practice, you're suddenly up against the market. A municipality gets tax dollars flowing in all the time, whereas private practice, you're dependent on the ability of the person that's running the firm or the people running the firm to generate revenue, to do so. And so it's a little bit scarier working for private practice. So if you have a secure job in the government, is it worth going into private practice for less money? I don't know. Less security. What is your long-term goal? You would have to learn how to generate business and do all these other things. I don't know. That's a great question. I can tell you that the happiest I was ever practicing law was when I was working for a federal judge, and I got to go home before 6 every night and no weekends and got a guaranteed paycheck. It's just job security, whereas going to private practice is different things. A lot of times when attorneys go into private practice, there's a different pace to things. The expectations are different. It's a completely different animal. And that may be something that you're ready for or not. In private practice, ultimately, the benefit of that is you can obviously make a lot more money. You can have a lot more potential. You can probably get a wider variety of different types of work. You can bring in business and have your own job. So the idea is that in law firms are very entrepreneurial, by the way. People are like saying, "Oh, I'm an entrepreneur. I never want to practice law." But it's very entrepreneurial, because your job is to build up a book of business. And then once you build up a book of business, you basically shop that around to different firms, and the ones you like the best works that way. So that's what your question, is it worth it to go into private practice? That really depends on you, and depends on what you think the benefits are as opposed to the drawbacks. And that's scary. I don't know how much the pay cut is, but it's definitely going to be a different type of experience. So I would be careful I would be careful. Let's see. Okay, so this question is, let me just see here. What is the best market for corporate tax, domestic and international? I'm licensed in California and New York. Okay. I think that I would probably say New York is going to be the best, because it's a financial center. And you're certainly in Northern California. That corporate tax is obviously all over. To answer that question, I think one of the best ways is just to search job openings. You can go to BCG and enter those markets. To make the most money, though, in terms of your highest salary, and that's not to say after taxes and so forth, I would generally say for those positions would be Northern California and New York would probably be the biggest ones. Let's see. What about, sorry. Next question. Let me just see here. Give me a second. What is the best market for corp? That's the same one. Sorry about that. Just give me a second. This next question. Okay, what is the best? What about foreign attorneys? Putting aside, just see here. What about foreign attorneys? Putting aside regulatory requirements for practice, do you think it's possible to find work in the U.S.? Have you seen cases on that regard? So that's a good question. So there are always, one of the things I don't like very much, and I don't know, there's all these LLM programs at all these different schools, and they're, some of them are very good. There's nothing wrong with them. But a lot of foreign attorneys will come over and go to these LLM programs and then want to get jobs after they come out of them. And for the most part, the jobs that people that are foreign attorneys, when they get these LLMs that they're thinking about, are working in the largest U.S. law firms. And for the most part, there's really not a lot of opportunities for foreign attorneys in a lot of these law firms. The reason is there's all the same questions that we talked about earlier, which are, can you do the job? Will you do the job long term? All those sorts of things make the firms nervous. And large law firms, frankly, are almost always hire U.S. attorneys as opposed to LLMs and that sort of thing. But they certainly do get jobs, and it's not to say it's unheard of. It's just I can tell you from decades of looking at resumes that it is very rare that an attorney will get a position with a U.S. law firm for more than a few years. So your question is, what about them? Is it possible to find? So what I always recommend to LLMs is, or foreign attorneys, is if you come over and you get an LLM and you get a JD on top of that, it's much easier to get a job. So getting a JD on top of the LLM, even though it's an extra 3 years, makes it much easier. If you don't want to do that, then you need to look at smaller firms outside of the largest cities or smaller firms in large cities if you can't get a job with a large law firm. That is the best way to do it. You need to be able to market your services and what you do to firms that are willing to take a risk on it and pay you. But it's very difficult for them to see the logic of hiring someone from a foreign country that is from a different legal system if you don't have a US JD or that kind of experience. So there's so many attorneys that try to get positions in US law firms that are coming from foreign countries, but the firms that they think about are always the biggest ones, and that's not really the way to go about it. It's also very difficult. There's no recruiters really. They certainly can be involved, but people apply to work with us all the time that are LLMs and so forth in school, and we have nothing to market because they don't have experience. There's an eligibility requirement to work in the US. Do you have papers to do that? And so law firms are just a little bit nervous about it, and so it's very difficult. So my advice would be if you want to work in the US, is to get a JD, and then, or if you don't do that, to apply to not just the biggest American firms and then go home, but you have to find smaller law firms that are willing to invest in you and see the logic in it. And it is actually a very smart thing, in my opinion, for law firms to hire foreign attorneys, because there's so few people that will do so, that if they do hire you, then you're more likely to stay and they have more control over you. So it's actually a smart thing for law firms to do, but meaning you're unlikely to leave because no one else is going to want to take the risk. So it's very smart, but very few law firms do that. Okay. Does your typical client conduct a search at the same time you are looking for potential opportunities for them? Obviously, as a recruiting firm or a placement firm, it does create difficulties when we're making recommendations to the person who's doing the search at the same time for themselves. But we're a law firm placement company, so sometimes people will be interviewing with the government, or they'll be interviewing in-house, or doing different searches at the same time we're trying to help them. As long as the person's working with us and they may be applying in other ways to other types of places, it's not, we can't tell people what to do, and why would we? In most cases, we're much more capable than if you're conducting your search at the same time. you can do much better using a recruiting firm than on your own. There's just a million reasons for that. And I could talk about it all day. My point of this is not to convince anybody to do one thing or not, but the typical client does not conduct the search at the same time. Most people will commit to us helping them, at least with law firms. And then if they find things that we haven't found, I don't see why there's nothing wrong with that, and why would I care? But the person's job is to get a position to do. But in most cases, if you're using an agent or something like that to help you, whether it's a real estate agent or whoever it is, and if I was using a real estate agent, for example, to find a house, I would probably tell the real estate agent if I found another opportunity and ask them to look into it for me. If I said I found this house that they didn't tell me about, could they look into it for me? That's how I would conduct myself. But most people have to make up their mind. And is there a benefit to using an agent? If I was a candidate of mine, I don't think I would want to, for law firms, I wouldn't be interested in using 10 different recruiters and applying on my own. But if I was a candidate of a recruiter and I didn't feel like the recruiter was sending me enough opportunities or working hard on my behalf, then hell yeah, of course, everybody needs to look out for themselves and do the best that they can. And so I certainly would not dissuade people from doing whatever they need to do to get ahead. You have to look out for your self-interest. The problem I think that a lot of people have when they don't trust agents is they end up harming themselves. Like, I've been doing what I do for a long time, so I believe that I have a good understanding of what it takes to succeed, and people that commit to what I do for them do succeed. But very few people, there are always people that don't, and they think that they don't trust people, and so they're always on the move, and because they don't trust people, they have problems that in terms of achieving what they could. But yeah, so that's just how I would think about that. Okay, and you have to see who. It's a good question, but no, the typical person does not simultaneously, at least it's for law firms, compete with us, but for in-house and stuff, yes, of course. What if I have some clients, but the work is not sufficient, which is why I'm looking for a job instead? When to switch a job instead of solo practice, or the pros and cons of a job versus solo? So the problem with being a solo, and there's not really any problems with it, but if you're a solo, then you need to learn how to grow your business. And there's lots of services out there that will help solos that have their training, and there's all sorts of stuff where they show you how to bring in more business and how to do things. And so that is something that I would do if I was a solo practitioner. I would take all the courses in terms of marketing and learning all about what it takes to get positions. If I was a solo practitioner, how to get clients, I would try to learn all about that. And if you do that, you can do very well, I think, as a solo, and especially if we have a good niche. Solos that have niches in different practice areas, trust in estates or family law or whatever, can do exceptionally well as attorneys. Ones that don't, that are generalists, often have a difficult time. And also, being a solo, you need to learn how to work files, and it's very difficult collecting money compared to what generalists experience. So you just need to really think about what are the advantages. Now, going to work for a law firm can actually be very good, because you can suddenly take those clients and sell them on other services the law firm may have in other practice areas. The clients will often spend more money with you because they believe that you have more credibility because there's a brand behind you. You potentially leverage the work of associates and other people on your files, and the law firm will hire them for you and help you. So there's a lot of benefits to working with a law firm as opposed to having a solo practice. At the same time, you're going to be under a lot of different pressures than you would as a solo practitioner. But if it was me and I was a solo, what I would try to do first is I would try to learn everything I could about building up a book of business and doing what I could and reading all about that and studying it. And then after that, I would do whatever I could to get better, to see what I could get out of the law firm. Because if you go to work, for a solo, and the more work you have, the more leverage you're going to have when you try to get a position with a law firm. But if you don't have a lot of business, you're not going to have as much leverage. So I would try to get as much business as I could first and learn everything until you exhaust. That's what I would do. What if I have some clients, but the work's going to seem questions? So I keep doing that. Apologize. 1 second here. I don't know what just happened there. Give me 1 second. All right, next question. Sorry, I'm just trying to copy and paste this question. Okay, I'm a senior patent prosecution attorney. All of my firm's clients have been very large tech companies. It seems difficult to get any of these clients of my own to bring business to my firm. It seems like it would be easier for Lars, a general practice firm, to bring in the work because every business needs legal work done, but only some firms need patent work. Is it considered bad to be patent prosecution and not having your own clients? So one thing about patent prosecution is I know lots of patent prosecutors that have solo practices or small practices that do have large clients. And I don't think there's any, if you're a very good patent prosecution attorney, I don't think there's any practice area out there like patent prosecution where there's more small law firms doing work for large companies. So Microsoft, Amazon, like all these big companies, sometimes there's like firms of 2 or 3 people doing all their patent work. I once was working with a patent agent that had a couple $1 million in business that was doing all this work on his own. It was crazy because he was very good at what he did. He had a PhD in some bio, I don't know. But the point is, in terms of what you're trying to do with those types of big clients, I'm sure that there's smaller clients that do similar types of stuff, and your firm may be interested in those clients. One of the problems with patent prosecution that I've seen in terms of I've been working with patent prosecutors for a long time is that in large, I don't know where you are, but if you're like in a large Silicon Valley firm, a lot of the money for the work for the large companies will either the companies make a lot of money or they're funded and things, and they're able to they have a lot of money to spend on patent prosecution. So one of the problems with patent prosecution is a lot of the work at the smaller companies and the mid-sized companies that are budget sensitive. It's not done on an hourly basis, or it's done on a flat rate, and it's very difficult to bring in that type of work as a patent prosecutor. And if you're competing with that and you're at a large law firm. So I don't think, to answer your question, you asked 2 questions. The first thing is, I don't think it's that difficult to get work as a patent prosecution attorney if you know how to market what you do and network. But if you don't, is it bad to be in a firm without your own business? I don't think, compared to other practice areas, and if you're a patent prosecutor as an older attorney, I don't think it's very difficult to find jobs doing work for other firms as a senior attorney. You may have to be geographically flexible. For example, it sounds like you're in you do hard IP, which is like electrical engineering, physics, that sort of thing, computer science. But there's certain markets where it's very difficult if you're in bio to get positions. But most hard IP attorneys without business can, if you're willing to look at enough markets, can always get jobs. It's really not that bad, and it's not that hard to market yourself. I've placed countless senior patent prosecutors without business, and it's not that hard compared to other practice areas. Okay, let me see here. Wow, okay. Thanks for all the questions, by the way. This is great. Let me see this next question here. I'm a licensed patent attorney and have also done trademark and other IP work, but have expanded into other transactional areas: contracts, privacy, ethics, technology. Do I need to tailor a resume to only show IP work or IP related work? To answer your question, it depends on the type of job you're applying for. But again, you have every resume or every background should have a primary practice area, and every attorney usually has a primary and secondary practice area. So your primary would be patents, probably patent related work. But that's fine. So here's basically, I'm going to give you a very simple answer to this question. And the reason this is a simple answer is because it's very simple. So you have large markets, which are your New York, LA, et cetera. And then you have small market, and then you have mid-sized, and then you have smaller markets. And then you have your large firms, same thing, firms, mid-sized, smaller. Okay, so your background, and this is, I hope everyone on this webinar understands this point, because this is actually a very important point and a good question you asked. So if you're like a patent attorney that does all these other things, and you want to work at a big firm in LA, I would say no, it's not going to work. It could work. Well, anyway, it's not going to work. But if you want to work in a mid-sized market, yes, and smaller market, yes. And the reason is that these are typically smaller clients. Smaller clients that are willing to have generalists work on their stuff. People that are more general, people that are more of a generalist work on their stuff. So what does that mean? What that means is that if you're a law firm, say, if you're a corporate attorney, for example, in, I don't know, like a mid-sized firm, if you're a corporate attorney in Madison, Wisconsin, at a mid-sized firm, you're going to be expected to know about M&A, about general. You may do some securities. I don't know. You may, whatever. You'd be more of a generalist because the clients don't expect you to have, you do not expect hardcore expertise. If they wanted hardcore expertise, they would go to a big firm in Chicago or something. So they don't mind that you have experience in all facets of corporate law, whereas that might not fly as much in a big market. So it's the same thing with what you're talking about. So if you want to have kind of this generalist resume for IP, that's actually okay, but it's not gonna fly to say I'm applying for a trademark job in New York or LA, and if you do this other stuff. So you're going to have to look very focused in the large markets. But the mid-sized and smaller markets, sure, they're going to be like, yeah, that's great. I love this generalist stuff because our clients from time to time need trademark and they need licensing, and but they also need patents, so they'll like that. That's fine. Same thing with smaller firms a lot of times, but it usually depends on the size of the market. So if the market is a mid-sized to smaller market, then being a generalist is okay. More of a generalist in that practice area, so they can say, yes, we've got a great IP attorney, and that's it. Now, what's funny, I didn't bring this up, but New York, there's not a lot of patent prosecution. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but it's basically because New York firms can't be competitive for the most part. They don't want to charge flat rates, and the hourly rates are too high. And there's just a lot of times, and even in New York, we'll see people that are IP generalists in the major firms, which I shouldn't even bring that up because it's sending you down a rabbit hole. But the point is that mid-sized to smaller markets are going to be perfectly fine with you being a generalist many times and in IP. Now, if you said you did corporate and all this other stuff on top of that, they wouldn't like it. But what you're talking about is that. Now, if a law firm is specifically, seeking someone that is a patent attorney, you would definitely de-emphasize trademark and other stuff if you're applying for a job. And I don't think you're going to be able to get a job just being a trademark attorney if you're doing mainly patent law. Okay, I'm an immigration lawyer with 25 years of practice. I actually use some of your techniques to open my own to find a job across the country and open a branch office in Orlando for an immigration firm. Nice work. I'm a partner in this branch office. Great. They also let me do the job remotely. So my business, well, it's been almost a year, but the amount of business being brought in has been very disappointing. I rely solely on the firm's main office marketing to bring in business, but it really has fallen short. I realized also that because of my special needs son, that I don't want to be in the office all the time, need to continue being remote. How easy it is for me to find a position as a senior attorney with no real business book, but stay in this area? Okay, so there's a lot going on there. The first thing is, if you're an attorney, especially a senior one, in a branch office of a firm, so you're in like Orlando and the firm's not bringing in business, one of the things that attorneys in branch offices need to do, and it's often very difficult, especially if you're reliant on attorneys in other offices, is you need to start talking to partners with business in other offices, meaning networking with them, contacting them, asking if they have any work, being visible, asking if there's anything you can do for them, and being top of mind. It's the same thing with the marketing people in the firm. You just need to be very aggressive and and out there and seen. Otherwise, they're just going to forget about you. All they're going to see is your low hours and that sort of thing. So I would definitely recommend getting out there. I know lots of immigration attorneys, and frankly, a lot of them are hustlers. Like they're out there giving a lot of presentations and doing things. I would do the same thing. I would think about how can I be seen and develop business? There's so much work you can do as an immigration attorney. I've known lots of immigration attorneys with huge books of business. There's tons and tons of work. So if you're relying on the firm to give you all the business, that's tough. I would recommend doing a few things on your firm bio. You should beef it up to the extent you can to talk about all the work you're doing so it's found in search engines. I would also maybe even, I shouldn't be telling you this, but even hire an SEO company to drive links to your firm bio page. It's a very smart thing you can do. Or just get some links from other sources going in so you come up when people are searching for someone that does the type of work you're doing in Orlando. I would also, but that would be the big thing. I would try to get as much work as I could from other attorneys. Then I would also ask them if you could do some of their work. And that's how I would do that. So you need to be like top of mind awareness of other partners in the firm and in the other offices. And it's not just their marketing, it's got to be your marketing too. To the extent you can get out there and hustle, I would do that. I do think there are people that I don't know who they are, but I do think there are some groups for immigration attorneys that may help with getting business and that sort of thing. So I'm not really sure about that, but I would do whatever I could to do that. And so then you have the issue of the special needs son, and you don't want to be in the home and you want to be remote. I don't see any problem with being remote. Most attorneys now, or a good portion of them, are remote, at least most of the time, or a good part of the time. But your next question is, how easy it to find a position in your practice area without any business to stay in that area? I would say not too hard at all. So if you do a search for immigration attorneys in Orlando on Google, you'll probably get, I don't know, Orlando, a lot of firms, probably at least 50, maybe 100. Those are all places you can work. I don't think you have anything to worry about in terms of getting jobs. My first inclination would be do everything as close to home as you possibly can. So you need to network the attorneys in your existing firm, ask them if there's anything you can do, and really give it your all first. And that means just being top of mind and that sort of thing. But it sounds like you've done a great job moving across the country to a very competitive legal market, but it's not going to be that difficult for you to find another immigration position in Orlando. There's a lot of demand. It may not pay as much as you're making, but I think it would be not too difficult. Okay. Let me see. This person says, this is funny. Let me just see. It's not funny, but it's a kind of a personal question, but I'm going to answer it for this person since they're one of our candidates. I received an email, but it did not list the name of the firm. What are the next steps after I approve the list? So what will happen is we get job orders from employers. And so the employer will give us we'll say, we want this type of attorney and in this practice area in this location. And so those are an engagement. So we will reach out to people that we have that match that. So typically we don't show you the name of the firm, but then you can log in to the BCG database and that firm will be there. And sometimes if you're an existing candidate, there may be other firms that were put into your account. I actually do all this personally. If you do have an account with BCG and there's firms put in there, especially if you're a new candidate, I'm always doing that. But after you approve the list of the firms that BCG sends you, the other thing is you have questionnaires. So you have to answer like a questionnaire about yourself that we use to put together information for firms. And then typically what will happen is then you'll be assigned someone that will work with you as you start to get interviews. They'll work with the firm and you to do that. But yeah, we always give the names of the firm. So you would never approve just some random firm. We also do something that's interesting. If a firm is interested in you and we tell you that the firm is interested in you, typically what we'll do is we'll have like your recent experience on your resume. And I don't know why I'm telling you this, but I might as well, so you understand why we're saying a firm's interested. So we'll have your recent experience on your resume, and we won't have your firm or anything like that. But we'll say if you're at a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 firms. So 5s are the most major, largest, and And these are the smallest, ones are the smallest. There's nothing positive or negative about this either way, but this would be serving individuals. People, sorry, my spelling's off, just vision's going. So largest would be serving huge corporations, and then everything in between. So we basically say this person's at this size firm, then we take your recent experience and then we rewrite it so no one can find it. No one could know who it is. You could know who it is. And then we remove your employer and all that sort of stuff and who it is. And so a lot of times we may have, if we have, I don't know, candidates in the practice area and location, we may say we have a person that's at a 3 firm that has this type of experience. Would you be interested in them? And so there's no way, it would be impossible for the law firm to know who you are, but they do know what your experience is. And if they say, yes, we're very interested in seeing this person at a 3 firm or 2 firm or 4 firm with this type of experience, we don't even say where you are. We don't say what geographic area. There's no way they could find you. Then the law firm, then we'll send an email saying this law firm is interested in you, blah, blah, blah. And that's typically how that works. And it's pretty cool. Sometimes law firms, it's a good way to get positions and something that we do that helps. Okay, so this question, is something about ChatGPT. Any ideas in ChatGPT to impact law practice in the next year? Yeah, so ChatGPT obviously it's going to eliminate a lot of jobs, especially legal jobs already. It can do contracts, it can tell you arguments to make in different types of cases, it can do case law. It's pretty freaking amazing. And there'll be more things like that. There's a lot of other AI companies out there in addition to ChatGPT. And there's ones that will emerge that are specialists in writing legal briefs. And ChatGPT you can already plug in a legal brief and writing contracts, reviewing briefs and missing arguments, proofreading things. It's incredible. So what does that mean? That means that it's going to be for certain types of attorneys, unless you know how to use something like ChatGPT or whatever the AI program is, you're going to be left in the dust. So you need to become very proficient in learning how to use these tools to get information. It's scary what it could do to the white collar job market. They're saying right now with ChatGPT, I was just at what was it called? Peter Diamandis. He's got a conference and I was in part of it, but I wasn't at it. I was watching all the videos, but they're basically saying that within 5 years, there'll be companies that are using AI like almost completely, and then and every other company that's not will be out of business. It's the same thing with legal practice. If you don't become very proficient in this stuff and use it, you're also going to be left in the dust. And it's very important to you should be using I think what Peter Diamandis was saying is that I don't do this, I probably should, but that he constantly keeps it open and all day. And as people are saying things to him, he's researching and using it. I think it would be insane not to use it in your practice. You really do need to try to use it as much as you possibly can. Okay, so I'm going to answer another quick question here. It says, this is from last week. It says, but ChatGPT and that sort of thing is very important that you become very proficient in that. And then there'll be other services that come along like that. And inside of law firms, I'm betting there will be people that are experts in that do work on that before an attorney ever sees it. So the idea is you have to become an expert in using it. Just as I'm sure these same arguments happened when things like Lexis and Westlaw came along. People were using books and then all of a sudden they can do research online. So family law is litigation. It's a very hardcore type of litigation. It doesn't require the same level of sophistication in terms of the arguments, but family law is a full-on litigation. Most parts of family law, meaning divorce and custody battles and different aspects of it, is very litigation. Now, the litigation aspect of it is more like last week was interesting. Last week we talked about litigation, but yeah, so that's what family law is. But yeah, family law is definitely a litigation related position. Can you comment on litigation aspects of family law? Okay, no, that's what I just did. Okay, a second. And I'm sorry I didn't get to all these questions last week, but I try to come back and get them. And if I don't do them right now, then I will get to them by the time. See here. Okay, how feasible is it for a litigator to transition into a transactional practice area? Are certain practice areas more amenable with this transition? Yeah, it's pretty difficult for litigators, especially if you're at a big firm, to go into a transactional practice area. It's certainly doable, but the idea to think about here is you have firms that are of different sizes. Again, 5 is the largest, highest billing firms, and then these are the smallest, lowest. Typically what happens is if you're trying to move from into a litigation practice area, you're going to have to, if you're at a 5 firm, which would be Sullivan and Cromwell or Gibson Dunn or something, you're going to have, and you want to do transaction, you probably have to move to a 3 firm. If you're at a 3 firm and you want to do transactional, you're probably going to have to move to a 1 or 2 firm. So that's how it works, because who's going to take a risk on someone that wants to switch practice areas or has a lot of training in one practice area if that person, what is the incentive for any law firm to do that? You just have to put yourself in the law firm shoes. Like they're hiring someone that's not sure what they want to do, that's trying to switch practice areas, that needs to be trained. And so it's very difficult for law firms to do that. And so they often don't do that, especially law firms. But you can do it. You just need to move to a less prestigious type of firm. Let me see here. I'll get a few more of these and then I wanted out of litigation due to the games the judges allow bad attorneys to get away with. Can you speak more about the issues of judges for people who wouldn't know how bad they are at their jobs as well? Yeah, judges, there's good judges and there's bad judges. Judges are interesting because that's political. And by political, what I mean is you have Democratic judges and then you have Republican judges. Your Democrats are obviously going to approach cases differently than a lot of times than the Republicans. So Republicans, would be big business and favored and tough on crime. These are just generalities. And your Democrats are going to be against big business more and soft on crime. This is just the generalities of what people think about things and how it works. And then you also have federal, state, municipal, all these different types of judges. So yeah, a lot of judges are bad and aren't good. It's more, the higher the federal judge, the more sophisticated, the higher, and then state you have trial courts and appellate courts and, so it just depends. So judges do allow bad attorneys to get away with a lot of stuff. And that's just how it works. And people do get frustrated by it. I think the general rule is you want to make the judge like you as much as you can when you go before them. They can do all sorts of stuff. They can make faces and have a relationship with the jury and entertain the jury and bring the jury over. The judges have an incredible amount of power. And they can definitely influence how a lot of cases go, and they make decisions even before cases go before with motions and things. There are a lot of bad ones. The best way, but there are also a lot of good ones. I don't know really what to say other than a lot of times the results in front of judges depend on their political parties. They also depend on the level that they're at, federal, state, or municipal, and then appellate, and then also the quality of their clerks. And if they're not clerks, the quality of the judge, how much thought they're putting into matters. There's so much that goes into it. So I think this is a great question, whoever asked this, but for people that don't understand it, yeah, judges definitely have a lot of power in things. Let's see. So I'm just trying to get to these questions. This is a fun question. Okay, so this person says, let me just see here. I am a solo attorney from a small town, enjoy research, finding weaknesses in opposing party's case, finding how to fit exceptions to the rules. This person sounds like a real attorney, and drafting motions. I've been successful in my motion work, but can't deal with the stress of depositions, deadlines, oral argument, and trials. I've let go of the Jeffrey Feiger dream. Unsurprisingly, he recently had a stroke. Of course he did. Do you have any suggestions on other career options we can do in their life? Okay, so to me, just to be honest with you, this person sounds like they're more of an appellate attorney than I guess appellate attorneys do have to do oral argument. They're more of an appellate attorney or a research attorney, which is perfectly fine. There's lots of jobs for people that do this kind of stuff. There's also positions for people that are like this kind of work as working for large law firms, writing briefs and things, or small law firms. This is what I would recommend this person do. I think these are great questions, but this is the kind of work that someone with this sort of background can definitely do. And I think that if you like this kind of work, then you're often much better off going into things like appellate work or working on motions. And there's plenty of attorneys that do this. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of attorneys that do nothing but this. Large law firms have people that do nothing but write briefs and motions and things, and they're not expected to argue them. So there's definitely nothing wrong with wanting to do work that way. And I think it's perfectly fine. Okay, let me see. Okay, let me see here. This is actually a good question, and I hope the person that asked this next question is on this call because it was asked last week. Let's see here. In 1 second. This question is, if I'm interviewing with multiple firms and get an offer from one, can this be leveraged into a better one at one of my higher choice firms, especially if it might be more prestigious, higher paying? Okay, and then there's something to do with laws of professional responsibility quoted here. Okay, I can just tell you what I've seen in practice. So yes, if you get an offer from one firm and you get an offer and you get another one, or can you leverage an offer at a less firm into a lesser firm into an offer at a bigger firm? So it's interesting, like a lot of times, if law firms believe you're in demand, you're actually much more attractive to them. If they think like they're the only person that's interested in you, I don't know why that is. But if a law firm knows you have other offers and that people are extremely interested in you, then they're more likely to make you an offer. Your question though is, can you leverage the offer into a better offer with a higher choice firm? Yes. If it's higher paying, yes, you can. You can certainly do that. I don't know. You would, if you have an offer, sometimes you have to say, I have another offer. I need to have a decision by this date from the larger firm, or I have other offers. This is my first choice. You can do it that way. Sometimes large law firms won't like that because they'll think, but yes, if people think there's a lot of interest in you in the market, then they're actually much more likely to make you an offer. I don't really, and that's always been that way. That's something to keep in mind. If people believe that a lot of other people are interested in you, then they're more likely to think that they're maybe missing something if they're not. I had an experience once, I don't know why this came to mind, but I just I'll bring it up. I remember I was in a senior, I think in high school, and it's just a long story, but I had this teacher that gave me a B and an assignment that was important in a class, and it doesn't matter what class it was. And I went to him and had lunch, and I've never gotten an A on not gotten an A in this particular subject matter. I don't understand it. And the second I said that, all of a sudden, all the results of everything I did in the future were A's. And so what I realized that it was subjective. And basically by me saying that I was this A student in the subject matter, because the next test I took or whatever was the same. I didn't do any differently, but I got a better grade. So a lot of times if people think you're in demand, you're more likely to get offers. And it's just something to think about. And then you can definitely leverage some offers into more offers or better offers. Definitely if people think you're in demand. And that's one thing that recruiters are very good at. So recruiters, the right recruiter can really make people believe that you're much more in demand. I've had instances where just an example where it's funny, this is years ago, and I had this law firm, I think it was in Detroit, that I wanted to get this candidate of mine in. And I was talking to the hiring partner. I said, wow, I've got this real estate attorney, and this is the most in-demand practice area imaginable. You have to talk to them. They said, really? Real estate's in demand? I was like, yeah, it's very much in demand. And so they brought this person in and had her interviewed all these people. And then it was funny because I think the office was in Bloomfield Hills, and the firm was based in Detroit. And then the guy called back and he said, we realized after interviewing her that we don't even have any real estate attorneys in Bloomfield Hills. And I was like, wow. And so she'd have to work for someone in Detroit, which is very funny. So they didn't even have that practice area, but I told them it was really in demand. So they brought this person in, which is very funny. And so they didn't end up hiring her, obviously, but they said they would if she wanted to go to Detroit. I don't remember, but so sometimes people think you're in demand. They'll just bring you in regardless. Okay, I lost my position with a smaller firm and am early on in my career, but will be interviewing with a large national firm that invited me for an interview. How can I best prepare to sell myself for this job, especially if I'm competing against applicants who may not have lost their job, but now may have more experience? So that's good. A lot of times, one of the things that happens with large law firms is large law firms typically hire for starting attorneys, people that go to good law schools or did very well at lesser law schools, and then have a sense of kind of entitlement that they start, and then people don't work out or they go to other firms. So the large law firms are always like feeling this person doesn't really like their job or whatever when they end up taking a job with the very talented or people that look really good on paper out of law school. So law firms love hiring people from smaller law firms or who sometimes that look at this job as like the most important thing that they could ever have, because those people are more likely to stick around. They're more likely to appreciate the job. They're more likely to follow orders. All those kind of things that I told you about earlier, which are, can the person do the job? Do they want the job? Do we like the person? Will they stick around? All those kind of questions. They're actually much stronger for an attorney that is coming from for an attorney that's being hired, that's coming from a smaller law firm. Large law firms actually like people that are coming from smaller firms many times, because, especially at the lateral level, because they're going to appreciate the job more and they'll take instruction and they'll be hungry. Whereas a lot of times, if they're just hiring a lateral from another big firm, that's not going to happen. So, good. There's another question. So we're working through all these from last week, which I'm glad. I hope if you were on the call last week, I apologize if I missed your question. Okay. Is it possible to move from a large firm doing litigation from a smaller market? If I went to a top school, or will a rough or slow start early in my career, starting a smaller market, lost my position with the firm, that's going to define me the rest of the career? No, so nothing ever defines you for the rest of your career. Just because if you went to a smaller market, yes, you can always get a job in a larger market. Anybody can. Again, law firms will hire people that want the job the most, that are willing to work hard, whatever. The thing to understand too, that I just think is important, is a legal career will start when you're 25, and people practice into their 80s, maybe the 90s. It's going to even be worse when you start talking about longer. If you have a bad experience before the age of 30, you still got 60 more years. Come on, no, you're not going to be defined by the rest of your career. I can't believe it. Like there's one girl I'm interviewing to be a recruiter right now for our company. And I spoke to her, I haven't had any time, but I spoke to her like 3 weeks ago or something, but I couldn't believe her resume. Like, she started out as a solo practitioner doing like 10 different things and did it for 10 years. Okay. And there's nothing wrong with that. But then all of a sudden got a job with a huge law firm in Florida, like Carlton Fields or something. I don't remember what firm it was. And then from there went to work at Mayer Brown or something, some other big firm. What the heck? And frankly, and this stuff happens. And I don't know how she exactly got this job. I don't know if it was Carlton Fields or whatever the firm was, but the point is that nothing you do early in your career is ever going to define your career. You will get jobs based on your expertise in the practice area. There's nothing wrong with starting a smaller market or anything, or losing your job. None of this stuff ever defines you. It's just crazy to believe otherwise. I definitely would not worry about if you get off and do a slow start in your career. You have nothing to worry about. All this stuff can change very quickly. So again, I wouldn't worry about that at all. You're never going to be defined by early things that happen in your career. Just look at politicians and everything out there and all the crap that they do, or celebrities. It's just nothing's ever going to define you. Okay, how can I tell if I'm talking too much in an interview? If it'll hurt my answers are too long? Can I make a mistake like this? Yes. So you should not be speaking too much. People should be direct and connect in interviews. But yeah, you don't want to talk too long. When you're interviewing, honestly, like, you should do 20% of the talking. And this is maybe not the right number, and let the interviewer do 80%. as much as possible. So people like people love to talk about themselves. They love to talk about what they do or what's interesting to them, but not questions like, what would you consider the culture of this firm? Or what are your top questions like, what is your typical day like? What would it take to really hit the ground running here? What would be amazing to you if, just things there's all sorts of questions you can ask in interviews that are good. But yeah, people don't want to hear like all sorts of long-winded explanations and they don't like it. It's boring to them. And you can always see whenever you're giving a long answer, you can always watch people's eyes like kind of drift away from you and so forth. You definitely don't want to give long answers. Some people like it. And if you're really likable and stuff, they might say, oh, that person's a talker and really like you. And if you have good stories and make them laugh and stuff. But really, you really want to allow the interviewer to do a lot of talking. And the more questions you ask about them, if they're actually interesting to you and they can tell that they're interesting and you can chat and connect with them, the more the person's going to like you. But yeah, you should never do a ton of talking in the interview if you can avoid it, because people are not interested in hearing too much information. They're just the answer. I lost my position in a smaller firm, in litigation due to lack of work. And I've been offered positions in insurance defense. As a relatively recent graduate from a top law school, I would be making a lot less than I would have ended up with a smaller firm. But now I'm having a difficult situation because I'm unemployed and need a position. Is it good to take one of these jobs or should I hold out? Okay, so these are good questions. You have insurance defense versus commercial litigation. So I'm actually glad that this person asked this question, and I hope this person's from last week on the call still. But if they're not, I hope that they see the answer, because this is actually a very good question. So the question really is, let me just fix something here, is insurance defense versus commercial litigation. Very good question, and something that very few attorneys understand and does have long-term impact on your career. So insurance defense, let me just zoom here. So insurance defense is, well, first of all, let's talk about commercial litigation. So commercial litigation is basically companies fighting over contracts and stuff, contracts, et cetera. Typically, because it's companies that you're representing, there's a lot of money involved, and people are willing to spend a lot, et cetera. So that's commercial litigation. Tends to attract, like this person said, top law schools or people, et cetera. The standard of proof, I don't know why this is that important, but points are more difficult to prove. Are difficult to prove because there's ambiguity in contracts, or there's just lots of different ways to go. And lots of very smart people do it in big firms. This is commercial litigation. Now, you don't need to be at a big firm to do it. And if you are a commercial litigator and you want to do commercial litigation, what's important to understand is you will win and lose depending on your writing ability and how smart you are. And I just hate to say that, but it's true. Writing ability, argue in court, et cetera, and how smart you are. And the reason I bring that up is because what happens, it's very interesting, but big commercial litigators, when they fight against each other, essentially they're making arguments to courts and they're convincing people that of one side or another. And some people, the smartest attorneys, and I hate using this because I'm not like trying to make these eugenics type of arguments or anything, but people that are very smart doing commercial litigation are able to come up with better arguments, easier to understand arguments, better researched arguments, all sorts of things that win cases. And it's very difficult to be very good at commercial litigation because it's different than a lot of other forms of litigation. And that's what the biggest firms do. They do commercial litigation, would be like defending Volkswagen for, gas tanks exploding or something. This is the kind of stuff they do. And then you have insurance defense. Commercial litigation is a good practice area, and so is insurance defense. Insurance defense is different because typically, not always, but typically, you're defending people that are sued for auto accidents, slip and falls. This is not always slip and falls, property things, and so forth. And because of that, it's not as difficult to prove the issues. And again, I actually like insurance defense. It's but it's difficult to prove that a contract means that if the satellite explodes, we're only liable for this amount. Commercial litigation can be very complex in terms of what's the proof. And there's a lot of money involved. Whereas insurance defense, if somebody's in an auto accident, you pretty much know that who's at fault. You can judge it and stuff, but it doesn't require the depth of case law and all this kind of stuff that typically is involved. And insurance companies, for the most part, want to spend companies have work all the time. And they want attorneys that are lower cost to prolong the inevitable of them paying the premiums or of them having to pay. Now, it's not always inevitable, but it's just the standard it's not as hard to prove something as it is in commercial litigation. So in commercial litigation, you have motions of summary judgment and all sorts of stuff going on. Whereas insurance defense, again, there could be very complex insurance defense where you're defending, but you have insurance coverage actually, which is a little bit different than insurance defense. But this is a lot of what insurance defense is. A lot of it is, it's not as difficult and from the standpoint of having to prove things, but there's a lot more work. So what is better to go into? Commercial litigation is very good if you think that you're incredibly intelligent and you believe that you can argue very well, and that large companies and big businesses would be better off using you than someone else. And that's fine. Insurance defense is very good if you want a position where you believe you're going to have a lot of security, where you believe you could build up a book of business from insurance companies, where you don't want to have to work on, where you want to go to court a lot and argue. Like this is something that commercial litigators typically don't do, but a lot of times insurance defense attorneys, where you get to take a lot of depositions, where you get a lot of early responsibility. But the problem is that insurance companies are often unwilling to pay for you to go into a lot of depth. To go into a lot of depth on matters. To a lot of depth, meaning lots of research, et cetera. I hope that makes sense. Whereas commercial litigation, companies have huge budgets, so they're willing to pay more. What do you make more money doing? Obviously, if you're very good at commercial litigation, you can do very well financially. If you like insurance defense, you can actually it's probably easier to build a firm and do other things in insurance defense. So what should you do? If you go down the insurance defense line, what happens is you're not going to develop the same sort of habits of being thorough and stuff that you might get in commercial litigation. People move from insurance defense to commercial litigation all the time. People also move from commercial litigation to insurance defense. The problem with insurance defense is that big commercial litigation firms will often believe that you've picked up bad habits, that you're not used to having to do all this proof, that the work that you do is under a lot of financial pressure because insurance companies are unwilling to pay things and so forth. I tell the story a lot, but when I started my first job, which is at Quinn Emanuel, I was working next to a guy that his first job was, he got a job at Morrison and Foerster, but then there was a recession. So he took a buyout not to take his first job when he got into, and then his only job he could get was insurance defense. And when he started, someone rolled in a bunch of carts and gave him like 70 cases and said, here you go. And that was it. Whereas and there was no supervision. He was just expected to go through them all and figure out what he needed to do. Whereas in commercial litigation, something like that would never happen. But it's just different. And insurance defense, typically the salaries are a lot lower because you're working for insurance companies that are basically trying to push the work out and do the work as inexpensively as possible. So I hope that answer helps. Let me just see here. Okay, so here we go. So this is another question. Okay, so this question is, I interviewed for a position recently and received very positive feedback during the interview, but was told that they're still early in the interviewing process, but wanted references in a writing sample, which I spent after the interview. Was it a bad sign that I was told this or that I won't get the job? Typically what that means is it's like they're dating still. They're not ready to make a commitment. They think, I don't know. They're interviewing other people. They're just trying to make the best decision. And they may have planned an interview with 5 people. And then they're going to decide, you just don't know. That's typically what happens in a lot of interviews if they're interviewing other people. So I really I wouldn't worry too much about that. I would just, if they're talking to other people, you should be too. And a lot of times people, especially young attorneys that don't feel like they have a lot of positions that don't have a lot of interviews and stuff, get very hung up on an individual firm. And honestly, you should, if the firm is interviewing a lot of people, then you should be applying to a lot of people. This next question is actually from today. This is, it looks to me like the vast majority of advertised positions are for junior attorneys. Why is that? Are the senior jobs not advertised? No, most jobs are for junior attorneys. So that's just what it is. So most jobs are for junior attorneys. And I could tell you all day why that is, but why? Is because they're cheaper, for harder working usually. And I'm not saying you're not, but working wannabe partner, more likely, easier to manage. Easier to manage, make senior attorneys feel important. I could go on and on. Important, lower billing rates, more trainable, just a whole host of reasons. So just to break this down, a junior attorney is going to expect a certain salary. As someone gets more senior, is going to expect more. The junior attorney is going to work is young, so they're going to work the type of hours that a lot of senior attorneys don't work. So they want to be partner. They're often easier to manage. Senior attorneys will think that they know how things are done or how to do it, and they're difficult to manage for a lot of firms. The senior attorneys want to feel important. If someone's 35 and they're a partner, and they're giving orders to someone who's 50 or whatever, or they're 30 and they're giving orders to someone who's 50, the person that's 50 or 60 is going to often resent them, that they're taking orders from a younger person. So that rather than deal with that, they're just going to hire younger people. The billing rates are lower, which is really the big one. By having lower billing rates, the law firm can look like they're saving the client's money. And so instead of charging $1,000 an hour, you might be $500 an hour or $300 or whatever. And so the law firm looks like they're helping the client, and then often they're more trainable and they're less set in their way. So that's why you see more of the junior attorney jobs. And then the whole system is set up to have the whole system is a pyramid. It's a pyramid. So you have, it's always been that way for decades, but you have just a few people at the top, and then you have lots of people at the bottom. So that's just how it works. And it's worked that way, and that's how it works. So the people on the bottom are generating the revenue that goes to the top. That helps. Sorry, there's some questions. There's only a couple more, but everyone who's staying on this is just a lot of questions, and certainly you're learning a lot. So it's great. Okay, so let's see here. If I was laid off from a small firm due to a lack of work and the people there were hostile, how should I handle questions about prior references? Will make me look bad at future jobs if you're not proud of reference to my last employer. How can I address this problem best? Okay, so let's talk about references. So it's interesting, like the most prestigious firms and the largest firms very rarely give negative reference. They'll say our policy is only to confirm dates of employment and that sort of thing. A lot of times smaller firms, you can't control the politics of a firm, but if they let you go or they don't have the work, then they're hostile towards you because you're costing them money, or they don't feel like you're. But a couple of things here. When an attorney's junior, you're always going to make mistakes, and honestly, I wouldn't worry too much about it. But the law firm, you're saying, how should I handle questions about prior references? Sometimes it's good to be honest and just say, if a firm really likes you and they think you'll do a good job, many times they're not going to ask for references. Just frankly, it's just true. You can just say I was laid off and it wasn't a nice environment and people, whatever. But, I don't think you're going to get a lot of questions about references. And if you do, maybe you can find someone there that would help you. But if not, I wouldn't worry too much about it. There are a lot of most large law firms do not give bad references. The firms that give bad references are often smaller firms and firms that are dysfunctional on their own. And again, I'm not attacking wherever you work, but that's how it works. And most firms are not going to ask you for references. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. I would just apply to places. And sometimes it's good to be honest and just be like, listen, I was laid off and maybe even the people I worked with are no longer there. What do I do? But I wouldn't worry too much about it. If they like you wherever you're applying, you're likely to be okay. But yeah, there's a lot of firms that, especially in small markets, can be really not very nice to people when they're when they're looking for lateral positions. Okay, let me see here. Okay, a second. But yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about it. Question from last week. I was a first-year associate who lost her position and interviewing several new firms, some more prestigious than the last. Great. How can I explain losing my position in a small firm due to lack of work? So you can basically say that the firm didn't have enough work. That's perfectly acceptable, especially if it was a small firm. Getting laid off is not the greatest thing and it can hurt you. But if you're in a smaller to mid-sized market, it's okay to have lost your job. And one of the things I would say is most attorneys at some point in their career have lost a job or have left a job because they were worried they were going to lose a job. So people can definitely identify with it. And if you're a first-year associate and you lose a job, I mean, that's just a learning experience, and everyone is green and needs to learn, and you can learn what's tolerable, how to look out for things in the future. But I don't think, that losing your position is that big of a deal. No one takes it that seriously. It'd be one thing if you were 5 or 6 years on and suddenly let go for no reason. This being you're young, you probably didn't make any mistakes that were too serious, and I don't really worry about it. I just would keep going. Let me just see here. Another question. This person asked this question before the webinar even started, so let's get to that. Here, second. This question. I have several good references from prior positions, but I'm concerned about my references giving me lukewarm review, even though others were stellar. Yeah, so just everyone that's asking questions about references, don't worry about them. I don't know what else to say. Especially if you're a young attorney, anyone that gives a young attorney like bad references, unless you're did something like egregious, lied or weren't repeatedly or weren't coming into work or showed up, I don't know. Any references they give you a young attorney are not something really anyone takes that seriously. I'm just telling you how it works. If you're very senior and you make some mistakes that were a reflection on your morals or something, that can be an issue. But I don't think the people that are asking all these questions about references, there's really not much to worry about. Okay. Good. Okay, so let me see if there's any other questions, but I think we're almost done here. Okay. Wow. Okay, so this question is, when should a lawyer consider legal recruitment? When should a lawyer consider switching to legal recruitment or a legal business support role, and how should they go about doing so? What I would recommend is, there's lots of different types of jobs that lawyers can do. Legal recruiting is one of them, but there's legal business support roles, or there's lots of positions. Legal recruiting or placement is a profession, and most legal position support roles are professions. You can do legal placement inside of a firm. You can do different legal business support roles. You can do legal marketing. There's all sorts of executives inside of law firms. So a lot of times law firms now have like CFOs, and they have controllers, and they have directors of HR, so the point is, though, is you have to find something that really interests you. And if you find something that interests you, you're much more likely to be good at it, meaning something should appeal to you on a visceral level, meaning when you hear that, like HR, for example, like there's different types of HR, but HR often is sitting in an office and trying to plan, making sure that the employees are happy, being a sounding board for them, coming up with things to make them happier, being their advocate, communicating to management. So there's that's 8 different types of HR, but that's one example. And sometimes the idea of doing that to some people is like the greatest job imaginable. Like they hear it and they're like, this is exactly what I want to do. Other people hear it and they're like, no, that's not something I'm interested in. So whatever job you're interested in, after you investigate it, should really appeal to you. And it should appeal to you at a level where you get excited. Like someone that wants to be an attorney thinks, I'm going to work for a law firm and I'm going to get to work on these documents and help clients and give them advice. And this is my job and I'm very excited. That's great. So if that's what your experience or what you are and what you want to do, then you're in great shape. But some people hear that and they think that sounds like a nightmare. So you have to, whatever job you take needs to be something that appeals to you. And that would be, and usually when you hear about it, it appeals. For example, for me, like being a doctor would be like, a medical doctor is like my worst nightmare. Like working in a hospital, like with lights and people bleeding and coughing and people crying when people are dying, that to me is like the worst freaking nightmare ever. But if you're a scientist and you think I can help cure people and I can do all this and I can use my scientific knowledge in a way that certain things appeal to people, you need to do what you think is what matches your interest. Okay, is a non-detailed reference from a large firm a red flag that is interpreted as negative reference to potential employers? No, I don't think so. Sometimes firms will do that. Now, there are like informal networks you need to be aware of. So if a big firm is hiring someone from another big firm, they will often, or that had worked at another big firm and is no longer at that firm, they won't certainly contact a firm if the person is currently there, but they may, if you worked at a firm and you're no longer there, they may contact people you worked with in the past and say, what do you think about them? And that's actually pretty common. That kind of stuff happens now and then and is something to be aware of. In most cases, if you're no longer at that employer, you have no way of knowing if someone from your previous firm is going to be contacted. So you need to be very careful. The biggest piece of advice that I can give about everybody that's asking questions about references is to never burn any bridges, to be as nice as possible to people. If you leave, send thank you notes to everyone saying thank you for everything and to be as nice as possible, because far too many people burn bridges and leave negative tastes in people's mouths. And that's dumb, because most of the time those people will be people that you want to work with later in your career. Okay, I think that's about it. Thanks for all these questions. I appreciate it. And I think there's a lot of great questions today. And I hope that was helpful. And I will, unless there's no more questions here, I will talk to everyone next week. So thank you. Bye.